Members of the public, we now have comment cards and agendas out in the back. If you need a copy of. Okay, and we will now come to order for the Transportation and Environment Committee for Monday, February 3rd. We have a quorum with council members Dieppe, Perales, and Esparza, as well as myself. And it looks like we go straight to reports to committee.
That's correct, we do. We have the airport here to present that item, so I'll ask them to take it over and introduce the team and take it from there.
Great, thank you.
Hi, I'm Judy Ross. I'm the Assistant Director at the airport, and with me today is Drew Niemeyer, our Deputy for Planning and Development, and Patrick Hansen, who's our Environmental Manager. As you all are aware, San Jose International Airport has been one of the fastest growing large hub airports in the nation, serving over 15 million passengers annually, or what is now 17% of the Bay Area passenger volume. And as we continue to grow, and in recognition of the close connection that we have with our community and the environment, we began our sustainability management plan to enhance our environmental stewardship. With that in mind, we have undertaken several initiatives to date, such as purchasing of our electric buses, converting the airfield and the terminal lighting to LED. We have the solar array on the Conrack. We are purchasing San Jose Clean Energy, and also our partners are recognizing to be environmentally friendly as well, such as Southwest's recent conversion to electric ground support equipment. And we realized we can do more, so we created a roadmap with the sustainability management plan of various initiatives that can effectively reduce resource consumption, environmental impacts, and greenhouse gases while promoting social responsibility. I would like to note from the beginning that this initiative that Patrick Hansen actually led was developed by a cross-section of employees across the airport with coordination of other city departments and facilitated by consultants. And most of the ideas and the initiatives came from our employees. Now I'd like to turn it over to Patrick Hansen, our environmental manager, who led this effort to share the plan and the initiatives with you.
Thanks, Judy. Good afternoon. As Judy mentioned, my name is Patrick Hansen. I'm the Environmental Services Program Manager at the airport. And before I jump in, I actually want to go over the actual roadmap that we set up in the framework on the Sustainability Management Plan and how we laid out the goals of the desired outcomes of the Sustainability Management Plan when we started back in July of 2018. So we took into account what's called the triple bottom line of economic, environmental, and social foundations when developing the Sustainability Management Plan. And we wanted to develop a strategic framework for reporting our visions and our initiatives and our actual progress on certain metrics to the public throughout this process. So at the top of the tree, we have the 8 dimensions of sustainability of clean air, economic vitality, resource stewardship, carbon neutrality, employee participation, resilience, and cultural change and social responsibility. So this kind of just is an overview of a timeline of the development of the Sustainability Management Plan document. And we started back, as I said, in 2018, July of 2018, with our kickoff and discovery phase. We created what's called a Sustainability Work Plan Group, where we took members from each division at the airport of facilities, operations, IT, plan development, and the director's office. We then moved into our current state analysis, where we took a deep dive into data collection for energy, water, waste, and greenhouse gas emissions at the airport. And then we moved into our ideation and prioritization phase, where we actually hosted many workshops and exercises with that work group to actually come up with different ideas and identify the low-hanging fruit based off our current state analysis that we did. Then we moved into the plan development, and now where we currently are today at the plan implementation and reporting phase. So these are a couple pictures from the actual plan development that show our sustainability work plan group going through some exercises. One of the key exercise that we did early on in the development of the plan was actually identifying key stakeholders, both internal, local stakeholders in the business community, and actually tenants at the airport. And it was important for us to define the customer early on. And to us at the airport, the customer is not just the actual passenger, but rather the local community and the surrounding businesses. Next slide. So here we're showing just kind of some charts and graphs that demonstrate our current state analysis that we went through in fall of 2018. At the top left, we have the greenhouse gas emissions inventory. We looked at scope 1 and 2 emissions. And scope 1 emissions are equipment that are owned and operated directly by the airport, such as vehicle fleets, generators, and other equipment. Scope 2 emissions are the actual emissions associated with energy purchasing, electricity purchasing. We looked at our annual electrical use by building, the energy we purchase, both gas and electricity, and water use trends. So we got an idea of how much potable water we're using versus recycled water at the airport. Next slide. We also looked at our vehicle fleet, what type of fuel we're consuming, and we realized that we have about 25% of our vehicle fleet is made up of alternative fuels or low-emission vehicles. We looked at our waste generation trends or diversion rates, and we saw opportunities to actually go for zero waste at the airport if we get to that 90% or above level. We're realizing that we were currently at about the mid-80% diversion rate, and we benefited greatly from the contracts that the city has in place currently with back-end diversion. So some of our current sustainability initiatives, as many of you know, in May of 2019, we deployed our 10 new electric shuttle buses. We received a 50% grant from the federal government to purchase those electric shuttle buses. We also made the switch to the San Jose Clean Energy Green Source option, where we receive 80% carbon-free and 45% renewable energy. As Judy mentioned, back in 2010, when we completed the rental car facility structure, we installed a 3.4-acre solar array that generates 1.1 megawatts of electricity annually. And in the bottom right picture, you'll see what's called a preconditioned air unit. We have those on every single gate at the airport. And we also have ground power units at every single gate at the airport. So aircraft are actually able to connect to those preconditioned air units and ground power units while they're sitting at the gate, and they could turn off their auxiliary power units so they don't have to burn jet fuel while they're sitting at the gate. So that reduces emissions also. So some of the planned sustainability initiatives, I won't go into each of these, but some of the major ones, we're looking at zero waste. As I mentioned, we're currently in the mid-80s for diversion rate. We'd like to get to that 90% or above diversion, and we are hoping to achieve a 100% low-emission vehicle fleet. And ultimately, our overarching goal is to achieve carbon neutrality in the long term. So going into the 8 dimensions of sustainability, as I mentioned earlier, for energy, we're actually looking into the 100% total green option from San Jose Clean Energy, where 100% of the energy or electricity purchased would be from renewable sources. For water, we are hoping to achieve 50% of our water usage met by actual recycled water or purple pipe. And for ground transportation, as I mentioned earlier, we've already received and put into use the 10 electric shuttle buses. We're actually moving forward with plans to, or pursuing a grant for 6 additional electric shuttle buses currently. And for natural resources, we realize our proximity to the Guadalupe River is very important, and we plan on conducting creek cleanups and hopefully adopting a stretch of the Guadalupe River along the airport property. For social responsibility, we participate in many giving campaigns, the holiday giving campaign and food donation programs, but we're looking to expand our food donation programs currently with loaves and fishes and a la carte to actually ensure that all concessions have the opportunity to donate food at the airport, and so that should be up and running in the next couple weeks. For sustainability governance, we are putting together a framework for reporting on our metrics of sustainability initiatives, and we plan on having a biannual report. And for climate action, as I mentioned earlier, we plan on achieving level 3 airport carbon accreditation or equivalent. And one of the projects that we will work on is actually becoming part of the Good Traveler program, where passengers can purchase carbon offsets at kiosks at the airport or through an app to offset the carbon of their travel. And for waste, as I mentioned earlier, we have the opportunity to go for zero waste, which is something we definitely want to strive for in the near future. So thank you for the opportunity to present our sustainability management plan.
And we'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have at this time.
Thank you. I don't have any cards from the public for this item. Does anyone want to speak on this item? Blair?
Hello.
Just a second, can we get the timer? Okay.
Thank you. Hi. As the future of downtown height limits has green sustainability issues, if you haven't already, I hope you can make clear to the public when and how money will be spent for a new, more responsible neutral study of downtown height limits, and that I thought was already agreed upon in good terms by city government and the Airport Commission. As the airport often works as its own little city and institutional practices, it creates good practices and ideas for other local services and functions. The upcoming BART parking lots managed by the VTA has learned some important lessons from the San Jose Airport, how ALPR data collection was once at 180 days, is now currently down to 90 days, and in a few years it can be down to 45 days. This can be a testament to the fun and creativity we can all have in deciding civil rights and protections and peaceful democratic practices for the future of data collection. Good luck in your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else for this item? Christopher, for this item?
So I'm for the Bicycle Coalition and making the streets safer, right? I've been in San Jose for 35 years, and I just was on this email I got to tell you guys that the proposed funding for making the streets safer for our community.
This item is on the airport sustainability. Do
Okay,
you want me
I
to
see.
call you on the Vision Zero
Yes,
plan?
yes.
I will
Vision
call
Zero.
you then.
Sorry about that. All right.
I'll call you when that item comes up. All right, to my colleagues. Councilmember? Do my colleagues have any questions?
I'll move to accept the report.
Great. I just have a couple of questions. Are there metrics for the food donation program? Do we know how many of the restaurants participate now and how many what's the goal? What's the goal?
Currently, we just initiated the program. I don't know if we have metrics right now to report out, but right now we have one concessionaire, so that tells me all the concessions right now are participating. When SSP comes into place in July, we'll have two, and we'll probably be able to have better metrics and report that out at that time.
Okay, so the goal is for all of the concessionaires to participate?
Yes.
Great. By this summer?
Do we have a goal?
So we should have the program up and running in the next couple of weeks, and it's available to all concessions to participate. We could, we could provide updates in the summer, yes, on what that looks like. But we do have a agreement with the concessions to provide data on how much food they're actually donating to. So those metrics will be a part of the biannual reporting.
Okay, great, perfect. And then in terms of the creek cleanups, have you done creek cleanups before? Is this a new thing, and how many are you planning to do per year?
It would be a new thing for us. I think the committee talked about maybe twice a year.
Yeah, we had the goal of twice per year. So we would work with obviously the Santa Clara Valley Water District and City of San Jose Environmental Services Department to set that up.
Okay, just a suggestion, you may want to also check in with the Clean Creeks Coalition. They are great about helping you organize cleanups and helping provide volunteers as well. So that may be an organization you can partner with.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then, could you tell us a little bit more about the Good Traveler Program? I had never heard of that.
The Good Travel Program is kiosks set through the sterile side of the airport. And what happens is the travelers can go up and identify their flight is from San Jose to whatever city, and it calculates the value of the carbon offsets, and then they can put their credit card in and buy that carbon offset for their specific travel. And they also can identify specific programs that they want that carbon offset to go to.
Okay, neat. So that'll be at the gates in that area?
Generally, we anticipate it'll be at the gates.
Past
'cause
security.
Most of our passengers want to get through that checkpoint before they have any dwell time.
Yep. Just got to make sure you get there. That makes sense. Okay, thank you. Any other comments from my colleagues? All right, all in favor of the motion on the floor? Okay, that motion carries. Thank you for that update.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And we can move on to item 2, the citywide infrastructure and deferred maintenance backlog report. We got Public Works, PRNS, and DOT, and PD. No, you guys are here for Vision Zero, right? You didn't have to give me the backlog report, Dave.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm Michael O'Connell, one of the deputy directors in the Department of Public Works. Immediately to my right is Matthew Nguyen, the division manager in Public Works for Transportation and Hydraulic Services. Although Matthew doesn't author all sections of the report, he does do the heavy lifting, combining all these pieces of data together, ensuring the report presents the information with one voice and coordinates with all the other stakeholders to gather this information. I also have 3 other deputy directors from various departments: Walter Lind from Public Works, Nicole Burnham from Parks, Recreation, and Neighborhood Services, and Rick Scott from the Department of Transportation. The effort to identify unmet maintenance and infrastructure backlog needs began with an initiative in 2007. So this report represents approximately 11 years in. When the report started, it was an attempt to determine how to measure the infrastructure backlogs. Each program had different assets and different available resources to categorize that. So what I've seen after being involved in the program for many years is there's a lot of layers on these onions. And as the time goes by, each program develops its own metrics and comes up with a reasonable way to calculate the infrastructure backlog systems. Now, it may vary from year to year, or it may vary from the perspective of one department at a time, but it's typically tied to the amount of funding available to do these condition assessments and come up with these master planning ideas. It's a continuous ongoing process. We're building on last year. I think when you review the report, you'll notice the completeness of the transportation assets. And I would give a nod to the Department of Transportation because since they struggled with pavement funding and landscape funding for so many years, that they got started on a strategy ahead of some of these other programs. Similarly, because the plant, the regional wastewater facility and the Muni water facilities are such critical pieces of infrastructure, they tend to operate and maintain their systems for that 24/7 availability. Similar to the sanitary sewer program as well, we started the master planning and condition assessment for the sanitary sewers many years ago, and we've seen the reduction in sewer overflows. So with that, I'm going to ask Matthew to take us through some of the initial slides in your packet today.
So with the support from the city mayor, city council, and the residents of San Jose, in late 2018, the city passed Measure T, which have many positive impacts on our city's infrastructure and the backlog. The biggest and foremost impacts on the city is on the pavement programs. With the investment from Measure T, city staff estimates that our projected 1.1 billion deficit in 2029 will be reduced to only $371 million in 2029. This is a big reduction of $729 million. And this is also a very good example of how the right investment at the right time will result in a significant saving in the long run. In addition to this, there's a reduction in storm sewer backlog by $35 million. And also Measure T provides a funding of $20 million to repair and replace vulnerable bridge in the city and reduce the backlogs in street lights and outdoor lights by $20 million. This table is showing the current backlog that we have on our book in this year, and also it's showing the annual ongoing unfunded need. The city still have a backlog, one-time backlog of $1.6 billion. This is an increase of $65 million from last year backlog. And in addition to that, we also have an annual ongoing unfunded need of $91 million. It should be noted that this table is showing the estimates that staff prepare based on the information we have on hand. And as we move forward in the next few years, we'll get more information, we'll conduct more condition assessment and refine our analysis. And we'll add more information into this backlog report. This one show another way, is another way to see our backlog in the city. Some of the areas with larger backlog from left to right are building facilities. Building facilities facing $188 million backlog right now. It's an increase of $16.5 million from last year. Next to that is convention center and culture facilities. We're seeing a backlog of $67.5 million this year. Parks, pools, and open space also seeing a $235 million backlog. Another area is storm sewer, seeing the same backlog as last year at $180 million. Last but not least is transportation infrastructure. Actually, we are seeing a slight decrease by $4 million in the backlog this year. However, it's still up there at $872 million this year. With that, I'm going to turn over to Walter Lin for building facilities.
Great, thank you, Matthew. Walter Lin with Public Works. In regards to our, you can advance the slide as well. Within the city's inventory, we have over 400 facilities equating to just over 5 million square feet. Our facilities maintenance teams continue to do a great job with the maintenance of these structures, though with any type of technology or infrastructure, with continued age, they will degrade, and there's only so much that the repairs will do before the life cycle is ending, and we're looking at replacements of major systems. In particular, with this deferred maintenance amount, the largest aspect is coming from the Parks Department because of the number or volume of the facilities that are operated within that department. Within the community centers and the restroom facilities, that is where we're seeing more of the need for mechanical system upgrades, plumbing, boiler systems, things of that nature. The next largest is Team San Jose. Those facilities include the Convention Center, San Jose Civic, the Center for Performing Arts, California Theater. There are continued mechanical system, HVAC upgrades, lighting upgrades, and ADA compliance enhancements that we need to consider in doing for those facilities. The service yards, Central Service Yard, Mayberry, West Yard, we have a lot of pavement work that we're considering for those sites. There's some electrical upgrade issues, as well as a large main water line for the Central Service Yard that contributes to that larger amount for the service yards. For the police campus, which includes the police administration building and the communications building, we are looking at continued elevator upgrades. The infrastructure there is aged, it's old, it's not reliable. We're continuing to look at design work and replacement work for the elevator systems there, along with more asphalt repair work, and some of the fire alarm systems are aged also. For City Hall, for City Hall, we are looking at some upgrades within the campus. It not only includes the City Hall Tower, Rotunda, and the Council Wing. We are including the 4th Street Garage, as well as the Employee Garage as well. The 4th Street Garage is actually older than the City Hall main campus. We're looking at some fire pump replacements and HVAC system upgrades at that site. For the fire facilities, there are roofing, mechanical, and electrical system work. Cultural facilities, I apologize, that number should be 5.2 million and not 7.2. We're looking at fire alarm upgrades, freight elevator upgrades, and HVAC work, specifically at the Hammer Theater, as we're looking at negotiating a longer-term extension agreement, 20 years plus 2 10-year renewals for that facility, as well as library infrastructure upgrades that we're looking at as well. Some examples of the building systems that we do maintain or are replacing. From the exterior side, we have roofing, outdoor lighting, elevators on the interior. That again is one of our main focuses because of the nature of, and the use of those facility, the infrastructure, looking at more replacements, more scoping to make them more reliable. Plumbing systems and electrical, as well as the emergency generators, specifically around the PSPS. We want to ensure that our critical facilities are functional and operable during those times. HVAC systems, as I mentioned, fire alarm systems, the newer solar energy systems that are now under the city's ownership. We have an obligation to operate and maintain those. The hardscape pavement, asphalt, those are critical items that we are looking to enhance, and as well as parts of the interior shell. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Nicole to discuss the parks program.
Thank you, Walter. I'm Nicole Burnham with Parks, Recreation, Neighborhood Services. So Parks, Trails, Community Facilities is a broad asset category that includes everything and anything in our regional parks, as well as our 206 neighborhood parks. It includes the trail system. It also includes our pools, our service yards, which I'll talk a little bit about in my presentation, playgrounds, also Happy Hollow Park and Zoo, and last but not least, San Jose Family Camp, which remains its an area of need. If you flip to the next slide, so our backlog estimates for this current year been adjusted with a total of $234 million approximately across the sports, across our park system. So thinking about some of the TBDs, we talked last year about playgrounds and that asset class, and I have a follow-up slide on that. But this year, if you may recall, we had a number of playgrounds that were outside of what we considered their typical life expectancy of 15 years. But we've been tackling this year the challenge of going back and looking more closely at those asset classes that are outside the 15-year cycle and really identifying what needs to be done with them. But because there's so many of them, we're still working through that and working through the implications of the results of that analysis. Sport courts and fields is something we've been focusing on. The sport court evaluations are actually done. They weren't done in time for this report, but we still need to put dollar values to them. We've evaluated tennis courts, basketball courts around the city for pavement condition, surfacing, condition of basketball hoops. And so that asset class will get filled in the next fiscal year, I expect. We worked on sport fields this year and found that to be more challenging than we would have liked. Finding and understanding the age and condition of the actual irrigation systems and irrigation piping proved to be a challenge. So we're still working through how exactly we're going to do that and get meaningful data. Pools are something that we would like to hire a consultant to do a study for. It's not yet funded, but we would like to do an overall assessment of all 6 pools across the city. And have someone evaluate and provide us information on exactly what needs to be upgraded and improved over time. We continue to replace pumps and systems and chemical feed systems as needed, but we have no big picture, right? Which is what we'd like to be able to do. And bridges, we do have some data available on bridges that we're working through with the Public Works team. It's translated, the information we have is translated into some maintenance, but the question is, what is infrastructure backlog versus maintenance? So we're still working through that. This year, one asset category we did fill in is the park yards category. You see a $7.83 million price tag up there. That was not information that was available last year. We contracted a consultant. We did a couple of things. We looked at, and just so the community understands, other folks have talked about, or Walter talked about service yards. Service yards are separate from park yards. So park staff report to their own yards that have our own storage of vehicles, our own storage of equipment, their own ready rooms, their own office spaces. So that's the distinction. So we had a consultant come in and we looked at our park yards specifically, and we looked at a couple of things. One was, what do we need in a park yard to be able to accommodate the number of staff that we have working out of these facilities right now? We developed plans for idealized yards and then looked at, okay, to get to that idealized yard, what improvements do we need to make? And the total price tag on park yards to get to where the perfect yard is more in the $40 million range. But then we teased out of that, what is infrastructure backlog, things like security systems, fencing. In 2 cases, we have buildings that are well past their life cycle, right, that really should be replaced. So that's where that $7.83 million number comes from. And we continue to see increases in trails. One of the things we've been working on with trails, with the support from our friends at DOT, is how can we look at them more like a roadway system and just do pavement management analysis and condition assessment to really get a robust number there so we can build on the number we have and kind of ground truth it and make sure it's as accurate as we can get it. The regional facilities represent numbers for regional parks, and Walter touched on the 147 million for buildings and community centers. We still are in the process. We did fund a position last year for a building maintenance administrator within the park system, whose job it will be to help Public Works really focus and dive in deep on these buildings. We haven't actually been able to fill that position yet, but we hope to within the next 6 months. So that will be our hopefully we'll have some more data and information in that category for next year as well. So the next slide just gives you a snapshot of, like I said, last year we talked about playgrounds. There were 283 of them. We added 3 more, so we now have 286, but we were able to fund 14 of them in the last cycle, and that's partly because we prioritized them through the budget process. So thank you to all the council members that supported that funding request. And then a number of them were funded through the Coleman sale proceeds as well. So we are working through the backlog of playground replacements that were funded in the last year. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Matthew to talk about stormwater.
All right, so in the storm sewer program, staff continue to identify and evaluate the backlogs based on the combination of condition assessment and master planning. In 2017, we complete our storm sewer master planning, and we identify a total of 22 high priority projects, which total up to $215 million. And with the Measure T funding from last year, we were able to fund a project to improve the drainage condition in Chacot area. And so that will also bring the total backlog for storm sewer down to $180 million. And in the next few years, staff will continue to refine the master plan as well as to conduct additional condition assessment on the sewer with focus on the outfalls and pump stations, so we can have a better idea and better picture of our backlog in this area. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Rick Scott from DOT.
Thank you, Matthew. Rick Scott, Deputy Director with DOT. Slide, please. This slide we use every year to kind of illustrate the size and scope of the transportation network that comprises this large backlog you see. There's no real substantial or significant changes as far as additional inventory here. We do have an additional street light, but beyond that, we're pretty much par for the course and continuing on. But it does illustrate that we have a large inventory right now, and as that inventory increases, so does the maintenance responsibility for those assets as they grow. So it's something that we keep a very close eye on. Next slide, please. So this is the summary of the transportation backlog. You can see the pavement backlog from last year was actually $539.1 million. This year it's $539.7 million, so that represents a stabilization, really. We've not seen in a long time where that backlog hasn't increased year over year, so this is a pretty big improvement, and that is due primarily to our record maintenance season. We did 290 miles this year, and that really did a lot in stabilizing the backlog for this year and actually leading to some very positive future trends that we're going to talk about both now and in our March pavement maintenance update to the T&E committee. We've also seen a slight decrease in our ADA curb ramp backlog as we've done a lot of that work tied to the pavement work. And then you will see the green highlights again indicate where Measure T investments will be making a big difference. So signal signs marking streetlights. Here, this is really indicating that our streetlight backlog pertaining to LED conversions will be covered through Measure T and the PG&E agreement that's in progress right now. And then also represents an improvement to the bridge backlog, which is $111 million. Stable from last year, hasn't changed. So overall, we've seen a decrease on the transportation backlog, one-time decrease of about $5 million. Slide, please. So as I mentioned, in March, we'll be coming back to the T&E committee with a full update on the pavement maintenance picture for last year and kind of what's to come. But overall, our condition assessment, I think we've talked about PCI, Pavement Condition Index score in this room before, is fair at 66, and that's stable from last year. So that's a big accomplishment because typically with a $30 million maintenance program, you'll see the PCI go down about 2 points a year. So holding it from our perspective is great, and we think we're going to see even better trends in the future. The backlog is stabilized, as I mentioned in the previous slide. It got up to $539 million last year with just a slight increase this year. And I'll get down to how we see this as a vast improvement in the future down at the bottom of the slide. Our 10-year funding level is $871 million, so our annual average funding level, we believe, is $87.1 million. And that includes a $300 million total investment for Measure T. So that $871 million exceeds the $782 million we expect would be needed to ensure our network doesn't get any worse, so it doesn't get below 66. It's not quite at the $1.02 billion level of investment required to get and sustain 70, but we actually think we'll get very close and may even reach it a couple of times over the next year period, just due to the sheer amount of the investment. So our projected 10-year backlog will decrease. So this last year, we estimated it to be $597 million. So it's a rolling average, or it's a rolling estimate. So in 2017, you're estimating the 2027 backlog. In 2018, you're recommending or you're discussing the 2028 backlog, et cetera. So last year, we thought that the 10-year backlog was going to be $597 million. And the year before that, we expected that the 2027 backlog would be $1.1 billion. Because of the Measure T investment in large part, by 2029, we believe our backlog, the maintenance backlog, will be down to $371 million, which is a 38% reduction from last year's projection, and I think about a 60% reduction from the 2017 report. So it's a great investment of that $300 million to bring your backlog down by $729 million. Next slide, please. And here are just some pictures of streets that have been improved. So you can see on the left, this was our first major year of residential resurfacing. So prior to our treatment, the PCI was 9, and a resurfacing treatment restores the road to 100. So that's Ludlow Way, and then we have West Virginia Street, which is a major street, previous PCI of 43, now 100. So that, I think I will turn it back over to Mike O'Connell.
Yes, and that concludes our presentation, and we're available for questions and discussions.
Thank you. We have one member of the public who would like to speak. Blair?
Hi. To just offer a few of my own thoughts on streetlights on this item. You're making a major conversion to smart streetlights, and these smart streetlights will have an incredible amount of more data collection and surveillance capabilities. And you know, in San Diego, at this time, there is quite an uproar going on, I've heard, about that this is happening there, this conversion process in their streetlights. And it seems to bring to mind that they maybe, I don't know, they maybe do not have a good public policy ideas in place. I'm not sure. But it does, you know, make note of the good that public policies can do, and to prepare ourselves here locally, you know, in the terms of to be ahead of the game. And to be ahead, I shouldn't say that, but just to be prepared for our citizenry who could grow very upset at what you're doing. At least I am. Amazingly, no one else is, but just very privately, of course. But, you know, in San Diego, they're voicing that anger. And I think it really needs to be known that just the importance of creating good public policy for these streetlights, for their surveillance capabilities, it will just bring an incredible amount of more community harmony and togetherness and understanding for ourselves. And I think it's a way to offer a peace, and it's just really good, important stuff for our future. And I hope you work on it. You have a really bad problem of doing that here in San Jose, and learn how to make it more available to the public. Use your Measure T public oversight group as exactly that. So I can ask them about these things, and they can give me answers and direct me to people when I need more answers, and they may not quite know. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Perales?
Yeah, thank you. Don't think there'll be an answer to this, but I'm hoping to get an answer over the next couple months, maybe. So in the report, you talk about a $38 million backlog at the Center for Performing Arts. And then in the report, you state an evaluation of phased rehabilitation needed for the Center for Performing Arts is under development, and then staff anticipates the 2020-2025 proposed capital improvement program to outline a multi-year strategy to partially address the needs of the CPA. So I wanted to see if I could, as that is being developed, if I could get that, and I'm wondering, is that generated in-house, or is that in partnership with Team San Jose, both, or who's responsible for that?
Yes, Councilmember, it is both in-house staff evaluation as well as Team San Jose review and input as well. The majority of that bulk of work is related to ADA compliance as well as the HVAC system.
Okay, because I know that I have two major concerns, and one of them was the ADA a couple years ago, including more ADA seats, and well, meaning removing some seats and allowing for some wheelchair-capable areas, or a large area, which I'm glad we were able to do that a couple years ago. I've gotten a number of concerns from people that have used it, that how the back of house is, and what it stems to is just how old the building is and how outdated, right? And so whether it's ADA or, you know, technology that needs to be updated, and this, I imagine, backlog dollar amount is going to grow. my thinking is, at what point do we start considering a completely new building versus continuing to rehab something that, I imagine it's gonna be pretty difficult to make that building ADA compliant all the way around. And so I'm just curious about that discussion, and I'd like to maybe dig a little deeper rather than just go down this path of determining how many tens of millions of dollars we're going to spend in a backlog, and then actually think hard on, do we want to do something else? And so if I could direct the first part of the question, which is just, I want to see that list and what it looks like.
Sure.
For yourself, and then the second one for our city manager's office, Jim, which
Yeah.
is, right, just
Yeah.
before we go and dive into spending tens of millions of dollars, right, just
Yeah.
what way we want to do.
Yeah, Councilor Peralta, on that, I think we've had in maybe a previous budget discussion, the idea of what's the broader picture there. I think economic development, cultural affairs, and others. So that's something I'll take back to the city manager's office, and we'll get back to you.
Thank you. The other one is I think, we have really good information, or I should say good results from Measure T in regards to pavement maintenance. And so, what was presented today and the outlook has completely turned around, which is very positive. But almost in the same vein now, for the same number of years, Parks and Rec and our parks deficiencies and backlog have continued to grow. And I think we talked about that, kicking around the idea of also a parks bond. But I see in the report what is said is PRNS will continue to explore alternative funding sources to offset both capital and operating expenses and reduce its DMIB burden. And so I am just kind of curious what else are we thinking about? Are we, going to consider, and this goes back to yourself, right? We're going to consider a parks bond again in the future. Are we going to consider more potentially parks maintenance districts like what we did around St. James Park? Because especially when you're talking about just the general upkeep, right, and the backlogs of what we have, I know that that's one of the major factors as well, is the usability of our parks. And when they're just not maintained well enough, then they continue to deteriorate even faster. And then now they just go into disrepair, and we have to put money into to rebuild. And so I don't think we have an answer yet, right? And I know that this is, in addition, a full council discussion, right, to determine what it is that we may want to do. But I'm kind of curious, because it was written in the report, what are the thoughts from PRNS's end?
I can speak to that. Yes, all of those things are all things that we're thinking about and talking about. There is some discussion of bond proposals. It's not our first choice for a variety of reasons. We also will be, there is some discussion about some other potential, ballot measures that may look at other funding sources. Nothing has been finalized yet or evaluated fully. And what you will be hearing about over the next year too is us reevaluating our PDO-PIO program. So we are in the process of starting to develop the scope for a consultant to get onboarded to really dig deep into that program and evaluate that and evaluate how that money gets spent. So that's the program where we collect fees from residential developers, right? And our program hasn't really been updated and modified in a number of years. And that I think will also lead to some changes in kind of how we fund capital projects and how that money moves around. That's our expectation. So you'll be hearing more about that over the next year.
Okay, just a couple points to add. So info memo was put out on parks facilities and green stormwater infrastructure. So the council got that in terms of some preliminary polling and survey work that was done. And I would anticipate that after the March election, there'll be more refined work on polling. An item I think would come in front of the council, in the spring, maybe during the budget process, leading up to the June timeframe. So I think everything that Nicole said, and I think the timing and focus on that after the March election will come into play.
Okay, thank you. And then lastly was in the street lighting, and I'm reading on the section here, it says, unfortunately, maintaining full staffing has not been possible, and in FY 2018-19, performance was approximately 43% of reported outages repaired within 7 days, and then the streetlight team accomplished 71% of repairs within 14 days despite the staffing challenges. So, and the question I have actually is not on staffing, and actually I appreciate the the speed, because previously we were talking months, and so a couple days for 71%, or a couple weeks, I should say, for 71% is not terrible. I'm more interested in the preventative measures. So how do we avoid even having to get to this part? Because, and tell me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is a good number of these streetlights being out is associated with copper theft. If I'm wrong, let me know. But, so I'm curious on the preventative measures and how we can, or what we're doing in that regard.
Sure. So copper wire theft was a major issue maybe about 5-6 years ago. It's really stabilized recently, so that's not the proximate cause for most of our outages. Most of it is just aging infrastructure and kind of these low pressure sodium bulbs that we have throughout the city. About a third of our lights have been converted to LED. The others, bulbs burn out within 1 to 2 years, the old technology. So really this streetlight conversion of converting to LED will address a lot of those concerns. And then we're going to have to, after this has occurred, we're going to have to look at our maintenance program again and kind of look at the preventive maintenance activities to happen on an LED light. But what we're looking at is a complete change in our infrastructure in the next probably 2 to 3 years as we convert to LED.
Okay, thank you for that. That is helpful to know. Any indication of what changed over the last 5 years, if, when
On
that
copper
was,
wire theft?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so there are a lot of things that we did over the last few years. As areas were I guess, victims of that crime, we were able to install metal locking lids and kind of seal them tight. And so what that's really done is just kind of made the crime more difficult to accomplish and really deterred in a lot of ways. So we would really guide our response based on areas we were having repeat issues with. And that was a big part of it, and there's other conditions that I probably can't, really delve into. I don't really know kind of the shifting crime, statistics and stuff like that, but that was a big part of it, was metal locking lids, I'd say.
Great, thank you, and that's all my questions.
Thank you. Councilmember Esparza?
Yes, I too wanted to bring up the bond and sort of really, I guess, remind ourselves that on January 23rd, we got an info memo about polling for citywide parks operations and green stormwater infrastructure, which was referred to in this report. And so how will that process move through? I guess that's a question for the city manager's office.
Yes, Councilmember, kind of as I was mentioning to Councilmember Perales, we've done preliminary polling, and I think there's more work to be done in that area, but I think the focus will really turn to that after the March election. So I think that's the timing, and typically, in looking at a potential November ballot measure for kind of anything the city does, typically focused polling, refined polling happens in the spring, late spring timeframe, so the council's clear on what they want to consider, what type of direction to staff in the June timeframe typically. And then if anything is going to go on the November ballot, it needs to be done very early in August. So that's kind of the high-level schedule that would need to track. And I think from a standpoint of schedule, after the March election, I would imagine the city manager's office, parks, potentially the green stormwater infrastructure, we'll look and see what makes sense, and something will come in front of the council for the council to consider that information and any other areas that they deem kind of important.
Yeah, I think that timing, it's aggressive, but if we're going to meet November, we really need to be aggressive. It was clear to me in reading this report that we're just talking large amounts of money, that we're really only going to hit the big numbers through a bond. Although, like Councilmember Perales, I'm looking forward to hearing some other ideas and seeing some of these kind of grow a little bit more so that we can evaluate it. So thank you, that's helpful in terms of timeline. I had a couple of other questions. One of them is about Solar for America ICE on page 9, that it's to be decided because it's currently under evaluation. Is that because of the construction that's happening right now?
Partly, yes. We know that there are some paving needs within the shared parking lot between Solar for America ICE and the Muni Stadium. That's something that we're looking at building a project around. But with the expansion project, we're still under evaluation in terms of what may be needed as improvements within interior spaces as well. So we're still evaluating with them.
Okay, thank you. And then, I'm not sure if this is a PRNS or city manager question, but Muni Stadium, it was briefly mentioned on page 9, but that it's from 1942. I thought it was 1941, but it's an old building, as we all know. And it is getting some lights, but really it needs a lot of infrastructure support. Have we started having talks with the San Jose Giants about their long-term needs? Because if they don't get those, they are looking to move to the fairgrounds. So,
Yeah.
has anybody had those? Walter?
Walter,
or-
have you?
Yes, so
Yeah.
He's
we've been
nodding, so
identifying.
I'm
Sounds
guessing that's
good.
yes.
Yeah, so we've been continuing to work with the Giants consistently in terms of their infrastructure, their needs. Very similarly to the Solar for America Ice, it's pavement that we're looking at. You had mentioned the lighting upgrades, Councilmember Spars as well. Those are the two main projects. In addition to those, we are looking at the interior infrastructure as well. As you mentioned, it's an older facility, just infrastructure upgrades in general within the interior spaces. That makes up the remaining $1 million estimate that we have. We do want to show that partnership with them as well, that if we can provide them with a good facility, especially to the standards of minor league baseball, to extend that partnership with them for the long term.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Minor League Baseball issued a report actually a few months ago recommending getting rid of some minor league teams because they couldn't really host games. So it's something they're looking at very closely. Great. And I had another question. I think this would be for PRNS, which is the History Park, including the Japanese Friendship Garden, Happy Hollow, and Overfelt Park, are included in the building facilities section of the report. Some of those have some really big price tags, especially with the Japanese Friendship Garden still recovering after the Coyote Creek flood. Can you talk a little bit more about that, Nicole?
Sure, yes, they do have big price tags, and Happy Hollow has a number of buildings, History San Jose has a number of buildings. The History San Jose buildings, we don't, History San Jose with Public Works really manages those. We assist with some funding, but they often have their own funding sources, so I consider them to be a bit of a separate category. At Happy Hollow, Overfelt, yes, you rattled off the tops of the list. So one of the things I mentioned earlier, we've added a building maintenance administrator to our team, or we will be. We funded it. We just need to get the person in place. And I think that position, we're looking for that person to really dive in and help us prioritize and strategize. What do we have out there? What does it look like, working with PW, and how do we prioritize and look at funding these improvements? Right now, they kind of are in one big category.
Applying for grants, does that include, so all the options?
All of the options. And we do, we recently applied for grants for Overfelt to rehab. We don't know if we'll get them. We applied for Prop 68 grants there. So we're always seeking funding and seeking to support History San Jose as they look for funding as well.
Okay, all right. And I know it's not sexy, but I wanted to thank folks for sharing the information about the sewage. I was actually surprised to learn that 80% of the city's sewer collection system is at least 40 years old. So it's something pretty important that I think most of our residents don't understand. So thank you.
Councilmember Arenas?
Thank you. My questions are around building facilities. And my first question has to do with the community centers that are connected to some of the parks. And some of our parks and our community centers are overutilized due to unhoused issues or unhoused communities and the issues that are created by having some folks living out there and creating additional need to maintain those areas. Have you all thought about, and I'm not trying to, steal from Paul to pay Peter, but the Housing Department has a one-time funding from the state, from the governor's office for emergency housing. I think it's HAP. I can't remember what the acronym stands for. Last year it was HEAP, now it's HAP, right? But I wonder if that's a source of income or revenue for you to utilize towards some of these buildings that have been impacted by the unhoused crisis.
I can touch on that. I actually can't speak to the HAP funding because I don't know if we're using that formally for those programs, but the OWL programs, the overnight warming programs, are funded by housing, and they do come with additional funding for security and maintenance. And I had the opportunity recently to be at Roosevelt as that program was wrapping up one morning. And I think we've been pretty impressed with the contractor and the way they've been able to manage, and it's helped settle in the community centers. It's still not the best long-term solution for the community centers, but it's definitely helped settle staff and relieved some burden off of them. But there is impact to the buildings. That's what we're hearing from staff. There's still, impact to the buildings on the capital, for capital improvements that are going to need to be done over time. And it's relatively minor stuff, but it's just stuff that is picking away at, it's going to pick away at public works facilities as we look to them to, with more work orders as the weather warms up to try to have repairs made.
Right. So is there any consideration on your part to pursue some of these additional sources for revenue? And I don't mean the housing department per se, but other sources of revenue that you could draw down from, whether it's the state or federal, whatever it is, but other sources that we are not tapping into that would help support some of our community centers?
Yes, and, we're always in the hunt for funding.
Right, no,
From any
I'm
source
sure
we can
you
find it from.
are.
But
Yeah.
I think the issue of the community centers, we are looking for funding specifically, to support programs and services and our facilities. When it comes to the management of our programs that support the unhoused, there is a lot of joint effort work happening between PRNS and housing and multiple departments and with the county, right? So we're part of that solution, and we recognize that we need to be there, but it's a multi-pronged, multi-departmental approach of people figuring out the best strategy to look for that funding, but that work is definitely ongoing.
Yeah, I'm sure that that housing has their hands full with the plethora of issues that impact us because of the housing crisis. And I don't know that they're necessarily thinking about our parks or our community centers. And I, for one, think about the Welch Community Center that we've reopened. It's been closed for decades, and it's made such a huge difference for my community. But once it starts getting dilapidated once again, people are going to start, not using it, and then it becomes this whole cycle once again of folks starting to sleep outside of it, and some of the toiletry needs that happen outside of the bathrooms and whatnot, then that starts to accumulate. And it's not just the community center, it impacts the well-being of that neighborhood, right? Because there's a huge park that's connected to it, and then there's a school that's connected to it. So it's also safety issues for parents who have kids who have this walking bus. We have a walking bus from District 7 over to District 8. And so there's so much that's involved there, and that's why I would love for us to start thinking about being the primary pursuers of revenue from I don't know, housing related sources for our unhoused, the way that our unhoused impact some of our facilities. I don't know that the housing department will be like the first on their list, it'll be 20th on their list, but for us, it might be really a little bit higher. I also think about the creeks, right? I have a creek out there that is always getting eroded, and, neighborhood associations that spring up because of it, and some of the resources that get drawn there from our police department and from park rangers and from, all of this is this, all this accumulation, I'm, speaking to the choir here, but,
Councilor, maybe I could add to that. I think what we can do is, let's refer your questions and points to the housing department and the interdepartmental team that's kind of working on this. I know the council's going to get a report back on the community plan to end homelessness, I think, in late March. And I think there's going to be discussions around Beautify San Jose in the April timeframe. They're certainly interrelated. You're right, there is a long list of priorities and needs for that state funding that housing gets, so I don't know. I think the needs will be greater than the amount of funding, but I think it's something that they are considering in everything, and at least they'll have that question perspective as they put that together.
or it'll draw new funds for, or for the Parks and Rec.
Yeah.
For that particular issue. The other way that I was thinking about, at least for my district, I won't speak for the other, my colleagues, but I know our Evergreen Community Center is, their classes are always full, and so full that sometimes, I've experienced it, that my kids can't get into some of those classes, right? And I have to wait until the next. And so there's plenty of revenue in some community centers that I think could also contribute to the community centers in the respective district to help support what the other community center doesn't have, if you will. I don't know how that, from what I understand, I think it goes into a general kind of pot, if you will. But I'd like to see a more specific strategy in order to kind of balance out the needs of the folks who have access to a community center and those who don't within each district. The other piece is, I'm wondering, I know this is a little detailed, but I'm wondering if you've considered, as you're reviewing some of the community centers and the operators, and if there's any in-kind contribution or any contributions in terms of for facilities that are now going to be required in order to maintain some level of maintenance so it doesn't deteriorate.
Yeah, and I have to say that I don't fully know the answer to that. I do know that we're getting ready to go to RFQ for a new series of providers for those neighborhood community centers. But I don't know the contractual structure. So I'll get some of those questions and and I know that that's a topic, that reuse program gets a lot of discussion at NSC as well. So we'll make sure we get those questions
Yeah, and
back.
I didn't want to say the reuse program because I know it has now
we're
a
sorry.
much friendlier name,
Yes.
and although I've forgotten it, I'm glad that you said it, not me. But I just think a lot of these issues obviously just overlap, right? And I just wonder if we're not leaving anything on the table in terms of revenue. I know it takes staff time to draw down some of this revenue, but I think it's worth looking at, especially if some of this infrastructure backlog is just going to add every year. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions myself. One is about the building facilities backlog. For Measure T, what will be covered for the police, fire, and communications buildings? Will Measure T cover any of those backlog numbers, and to what extent do we know?
Thank you, Matt Kano, Director of Public Works. Yes,
We
police
didn't get a green highlight on those like we did for pavement.
No. The pavement maintenance number, as you know, as you just referenced, is the only number with the guaranteed allotment for Measure T of at least $300 million.
Right.
The police administrative building is definitely included as part of the commitments in Measure T. At this point, we have not allocated a specific funding amount in the budget yet. Whatever funding we do take is currently in the reserves. We're waiting on allocating we're waiting on recommending allocating money from the reserves until we get a little farther along scoping and identifying some of the other projects, such as the police academy and locating a few more fire stations and the emergency operations center. So I imagine a little later this year, hopefully we'll be a lot farther along with those items and we'll be comfortable indicating how much of that reserve is left for projects like the police administrative building, which, as you mentioned, needs a lot of work.
Okay, thank you. So it's not that it's none, it's just that we don't know the number yet.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. And then the other question I had, and this might be for you, Matt, I'm not sure. There was no mention of the Climate Smart plan in here, and I'm wondering, so we're switching over to LEDs, and we talked about how we're actually gonna get savings for that over time, and I think the maintenance savings on that's gonna be huge, because we just heard that the old bulbs burn out in just a few years, and the LEDs are gonna last, I think it's like 10 or 15, I can't even remember the number, but what about, like when we're talking about replacing roofs, are we adding solar? What kinds of efficiencies are we adding, and are those efficiencies included in our backlog? So I guess I don't know how the backlog gets calculated exactly in terms of if we're gonna replace something with something more efficient. How does that get
Yes,
calculated?
Councilmember Davis, specifically for lighting, yes. So as we're starting to look at end of life of exterior and interior lighting systems, Measure T is supporting the exterior facility lighting, and we're moving forward with those. For interior lighting, we are looking at those upgrades as well and submitting budget proposals for those. In terms of solar and other sustainability features, that's a part of our green building program as well. So where we can scope it and it's feasible, we are looking at those. In particular, for future resiliency efforts, we are looking at not necessarily the same diesel generators, and we will do so for some of the more critical immediate needs, but as we have some time and we can scope and design and determine feasibility for those types of alternate backup systems, we are considering those for those critical facilities.
Okay, and so how does that get kind of quantified into the backlog numbers? Do we, when we're talking about backlog, are we talking about replacement, or are we talking about, you know, if we're planning to do an upgrade?
For the proactive upgrades, it may not be captured in this report. We're
Okay.
looking more so at the reactionary end-of-life existing system replacements.
Okay, so like lighting would be included in that, for example?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Great. Would HVAC, because we get more efficient systems on that?
Yes, so HVAC, electrical systems, lighting, even from a water conservation standpoint, plumbing as well too.
Okay, and are we quantifying in any way how that would help us with our annual ongoing costs?
We have done some cost analysis for electrical savings and the non-expenditure on the utility side based on those efficiencies. For lighting and water, we can continue to do so for some of the newer technologies that we're looking at as well. Very good point.
Thank you. All right, I think we are looking for a motion to refer.
To approve and refer to the February 25th council agenda.
All right, all in favor? And that motion carries, and we can move on to item D3, which I think many of our community members are here for, the Vision Zero report.
Are you ready? We're going to
I am
switch
ready.
things up and move on this side.
The slides are up for you. You can't see your slides, though.
We memorized them. So thank you, committee. This is John Russell, Director of Transportation. With me today at the table is Lily Limsau, our Deputy Director, Jesse Minceroth, our Vision Zero Program Manager, Chief Deputy Tyndall, and Lieutenant Anaya. We'll be presenting each different sections of this, but I just want to go over a little bit of background. Back in November at this meeting, we presented a draft Vision Zero action plan, and then we took a lot of really good input from committee and stakeholders. And we were asked to come back with a final Vision Zero action plan, also to refine the numbers or the dollar amounts that we thought we were going to need to do to actually make some difference in the community in terms of some of the fatalities and severe injuries. And so we're going to do that today. So what we have for you today is a final Vision Zero action plan that takes into account input that we received both from the committee and especially Councilmember Prowl's memo, and also from the stakeholders that we've heard since then and now, and also the mayor's budget memo that actually set some funding up for some of the things that we needed to do. So we're going to jump into that presentation today, and hopefully the two things we'd like to have is consider the final plan of action, and then also recommend that we move forward cross-reference to the council on February 11th, and also do a supplemental memo that identifies and obligates funding for this first year of quick build activities. So I'm going to turn it over to Lily. Oh, Jesse, great.
That was easy, Lily.
Okay. Hi, I'm Jesse Mintzroth, the Vision Zero Program Manager. So on this first slide, which shows the traffic fatality increases, we just want to talk about the data in this report, which is for the 5 years of most of the data in the report is for 2014 to 2018, but this trend line was intended to be 2009 to 2018, which is 10 years. You can see traffic fatalities going up. There is a dotted line that connects the total fatality number for 2019. As you can see, it has gone up from 2018. So unfortunately, 60 people lost their lives on our streets in 2019, similar to 2015. And the data inspires us to do this work. And we would really like to thank the advocacy community and families affected by traffic fatalities in San Jose for being here and for contributing to this plan. And additionally, for always reminding us that when we discuss traffic fatalities in this way, these are numbers in the report, but the people are not numbers. There are neighbors who don't come home. So, next slide. This slide will be familiar from November. On the left, we have the 17 priority safety corridors mapped and showing that they significantly overlap with the MTC's community of concerns in yellow. They are where 43% of fatalities from 2014 to 2018 occur. The blue lines are the 15 city-controlled priority safety corridors, which represent 56 road miles, and the green lines are county expressways, which are 2 of them, which are 14 miles. In the middle, the circle indicates the different sort of share of the modes of road users that are part of the 52 traffic fatalities in 2018. The pedestrian share shown in here is the highest, and so it indicates a need to focus on pedestrians. And looking at the median age, particularly older adults, the median age in 2018 for pedestrian fatalities was 56 years old. Just to touch on 2019 fatality numbers, the number and percent of the total in 2019 remains the largest for pedestrians. So total is 60 for pedestrians, 29, and that represents 48%. Bikes have also risen. In 2019, they are 7, and they represent 12%. And the median ages are also similar. Pedestrian median ages in 2018 on the slide, 56. In 2019, 58. Pedestrian bike median age on the slide, 59, and in 2019 is 69. Speed is the top factor. Just to explain this slide, on the right, we have the likelihood of fatality for a vehicle hitting a pedestrian. At 30 miles per hour, it's 50% chance of survival. If you go to 40 mile per hour street, the likelihood of fatality is 90%. So then on the left part of the slide are the speed limits, the legal posted speed limits for our priority safety corridors in San Jose. And 94% of them have posted speed limits of 30 miles per hour or higher. And as we can see in the data, we need to change that. Finally, the speeding. Speeding is the illegal side, and it is also the top known contributing factor in San Jose's fatal and severe injury crashes. Among KSIs, so fatal and severe injury crashes for the years 2014 to 2018, speeding is involved in 23% of crashes. That's the number 1 factor, which is higher than the number 2 and number 3 causes together, which are both around 9%. So the Vision Zero Action Plan has 6 priority action areas, and when we were here in November, we were asked to solicit feedback from other departments and agencies, which we did. The following pages contain the vetted details of the 2020 Vision Zero Action Plan. And we'd also like to thank the Transportation and Environment Committee for its input in November, including Councilmember Peralez's November 1st memo. The first priority action area is to build robust data analytics tools. And you can see on the slide the first one that we made available in November at visionzerosj.org, which has the 5 years of crash data available. Following the data leads us to strategies and investments. It will help us understand how people travel and what influences their behavior. And that is the background of why we're interested in pursuing the analytics, insights, and predictive modeling tool. And to talk about linking data, key to the data aggregation is bringing in data from different stakeholders. And we don't have as much data today as we would like. For example, fatalities that occur in San Jose on VTA property or data from trauma centers that verify the severity of an injury reported in police reports. Other cities have found that over 30% of severe injuries are not in crash reports. Number 2, form a Vision Zero task force. This is primarily to be made up of decision makers from city departments, county agencies, and street safety advocates. It will have quarterly meetings and will start in March, presuming a chair is identified. We envision the work plan will focus on review of coordinating operational strategies that identify and leverage resources, and then the data coordination across government entities. We've been meeting more frequently with the police department to share points on traffic enforcement and data. And so for the next slide, Deputy Chief Tyndall will present.
Thank you, Jesse. I also would like to acknowledge the yellow signs that we have here today for all those who have lost their lives in 2019 fatalities, and also the friends and families that are here. My heartfelt condolences to you all for your loss. And looking at this slide, I know that a large discussion was on the continued increase of traffic enforcement and enforcement officers. I know the chief is going to talk about this more in depth next week to full council. But as you all are aware, TEU has been increased the latter part of 2019, almost double. And we've seen some great strides in enforcement from these few traffic officers that are out there. In fact, in December alone, they have issued over 1,200 citations specific to enforcement efforts involving Vision Zero and KSIs that are involved in that. So they are going to continue to do that, and it's much needed enforcement that we've been needing for a while. Again, the Chief of Police will be addressing the staffing concerns, but I will say it is the utmost priority of this department to staff TEU, continue to add traffic officers to those places. But we all know that we must do it logically with other needs of the city and of the police department, so we have to do it methodically as we walk through. And as I said before, every single body that comes out of that academy is looked at for where is it best suited as far as where that position is going to go. But I do want to point out that every officer who works in San Jose is in fact a traffic officer. They have all been trained in the academy. Sometimes it is a little harder to redirect them towards traffic enforcement when they're responding to 911 calls. But we have been looking at and have certainly dealt with a little bit more, and I will discuss this in a few minutes, as far as redirecting some of those priorities as far as where they are, and even on an overtime basis, getting them out there in these main corridors, enforcing traffic laws out there that will absolutely directly work around these KSIs. So with that being said, the increased coverage during evenings and weekends, again, it's a little harder for TEU to get out there, although they certainly have been. We certainly have been using more of our patrol officers, even on an overtime basis, to do that. Just over the last few weekends, we didn't do it this last weekend, But the 2 weekends before that, we put out at a limited basis, late at night, DUI cars. Just from that portion alone, and again, these were officers that were coming in on an overtime basis, some of it funded through grant funding, over 23 DUI arrests just from the few hours that we were using on a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night. So the work was certainly out there to do that. Additionally, and I'll even put this out, and it was not planned for this, but on Saturday night, we continued to monitor in the city, and I know that a lot of you were involved in the red teams or dealing with street racer enforcement and the ordinance that went with that. Just this past Saturday, we got word that some individuals from outside of our city were coming to San Jose to be involved in street racing in different various parts of the city. We mobilized staff and actually brought midnight and officers in earlier. From that alone on Saturday night, 28 citations were issued. We were able to push these street racers outside of the city limits, and we had no reported problems from these groups, even though there were hundreds and hundreds of cars and people in each of our shopping centers that were essentially meeting for the purpose of moving around the city of San Jose and being involved in street racing. So again, another success there. I know it was mentioned as far as the regularly meeting, but I will say that our communication with DOT is better than it probably was, at least in my 25 years in San Jose, than it has been before. Certainly between traffic investigations, traffic enforcement, and then also DOT working on those specific areas that are known to be high impact areas, the areas that we talk about, and then just essentially putting boots in the grounds out there. So that's certainly worked out. And I would say even more so than that, the fact that the communication's been better, we're now pushing that information out to, again, the boots on the ground. So our captains, our divisional captains of the 4 divisions in the police department that cover every one of your council districts are getting the same information. The police officers in the street are getting the same information that traffic enforcement is getting. So even if there is an officer who's out there that's in between 911 calls or responding to calls for service, they know what these corridors are in their own districts and in your council districts to be able to look for some of these things. Because they all know, they're all active participants in this. I mean, they're the ones that are, quite frankly, responding to these car accidents and these fatals before anybody else is. So they certainly know where these areas are, and just bolstering that with the KSI, essentially what to be looking for will bolster essentially what their enforcement is out there. The targeted enforcement, I think I already talked about as far as it's out there, but again, it's really just identifying what these KSI factors are and where we can make the most impact. Just with our limited resources, it really is just drilling down on where it is. And like Jesse's talking about, data is everything. Data truly is. The more data that we have, the more we can focus and pinpoint what the actions are. It is definitely helpful for us, especially with our staffing as it stands, to look at what are the times of the day, what are the days of the week. What are the specific sections of the vehicle code that we should be looking for? More so than just kind of going out there and with a dartboard and taking a shot in the dark. How can we kind of continue to focus on this? And I will say the communication between us is such that I certainly think we're going to see an impact in that. And then just lastly, and I'll touch on it, but to continue to lobby for automated speed enforcement. I mean, some of this is a little bit out of our hands. A lot of this deals with what is going on up in Sacramento. I would ask each and every one of you to obviously, we are continuing to lobby for this. There's other police agencies throughout the state that are continuing to lobby for this. And it really is just something that needs to be addressed up in the Sacramento model, up in the Sacramento lobby area up there, because we do continue to fight this. We do think that this would be, if put in San Jose, would act as a deterrent to a lot of the speeding and or the speed-related accidents that we have out there. And I'll pass it back to Jesse.
Thank you. So the 4th area is to increase community outreach and awareness. So we've received comments from Councilmember Perales in his November 1st memo to the committee for more coordinated safety messaging strategy. Whereas in the past, or up to now, we have focused on working with school-age children, we began recently working with older adults. And you can see one of the images on this slide that we recently brought to San Jose and is beginning to be put in the streets. Additionally, we've recently interviewed other Vision Zero cities about their messaging strategies in the fall, and we are now beginning an RFP that will include strategy, market research, implementation, and also assessing the effectiveness of this overall campaign. And we're leveraging OED's experience in outreach and targeting a spring release for the communications RFP. The fifth area is the quick build safety projects. We estimate that quick build projects on the city's 56 miles of priority safety corridor will cost $20 million, which is less than 5% the cost of building projects using capital materials. This will require approximately $4 million per year to build 11 miles of projects. Next slide. Looking in terms of how to prioritize resources, we propose to focus the quick build investments on the city's priority safety corridors. If you've seen this chart before when we've come to T&E, if you look in the final column, the districts that have the most fatal and severe injuries are District 7, 3, 6, and 5. DOT Deputy Director Lily Limsow will speak about how we're thinking about the investment plan and project prioritization.
Thank you, Jesse. Next slide. Okay. So staff is eager to start working. In the memo, we, in order to accomplish this work, we have proposed a reallocation of traffic CIP funds in the tune of $6.7 million in the first year. 1.3 of that $1 million to be allocated this fiscal year to allow staff to focus and advance the 4 key points up there on the screen, including data analytics too. These are, let me note that these are all seed monies. It is not intended to be a full funding for each of the work. So first 200 to be allocated to the development robust data analytic tool, something like that of urban logic, and as well as machine learning capable analytic tools. Retain third-party consultant that will begin to develop strategy for outreach and engagement, and that is likely to be in the tune of $1 million a year ongoing, depending on how far-reaching and how deep we would go. $500,000 to direct towards the design of quick build projects for the first 11 miles of priority safety corridor. Staff is already working with consultants, securing consultant services, the build team, as well as assessing materials that would best go along the priority safety corridors. And lastly, to initiate design for Story and Jackson as part of the rules memo that was sent to us. The balance of $5.48 million would be for the first full year in 2021, and that would provide for the 11 miles of quick build work. On the last line here indicates that there's in excess of $22 million required for remaining of the 56 miles work to be done. As actually, that's an error. It's $18 million. We double counted one of the years, so that number should be $18 million. It is currently yet to be identified where that amount would come from, but at this point, staff has identified a reallocation of $6.7 million. Okay. This number, though, does not include a conversation we had in November for investment in traffic signals, where the discussion was where approximately 500 to 600 feet, we would have a controlled crossing. That number is not included in this quick build plan. So with that, we end our presentation and open for Q&A.
Thank you. We have many members of the public who would like to speak. Starting with John Cordes, Diane Sullivan, Robin Romer, and Fred Buzo. start there. Hi.
Good afternoon, council members and city staff. I'm John Cordes, speaking on behalf of the Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition. Our purpose is to create healthy communities, environment, and economy through increased use of bicycling for people who live, work, and play in San Jose and surrounding neighborhoods. We strive to create communities that value, include, and encourage bicycling for all purposes and for all people. As you can see from our demonstration today, of the placards for the 35 people who were killed walking and bicycling in San Jose last year, your recommendations today will have life and death impacts. Please consider all the lives lost and families impacted by all this unnecessary death. The Bicycle Coalition advocates for safer streets for everyone, which is why we've been a strong supporter for effective Vision Zero plans. San Jose should be proud to be one of the original Vision Zero adopters. Now we urge San Jose to make the necessary commitments to achieve rapid progress in reducing traffic fatalities, particularly for our most vulnerable road users. San Jose had 60 traffic fatalities last year, and though the city has had a Vision Zero plan since 2015, fatalities have been on the rise recently. We hope that this new and expansive plan will turn this trend around. We encourage San Jose to implement these critical safety improvements faster. We encourage you to recommend increasing the 18-month funding to $10 million instead of the $7 million that the city has asked for, and to implement quick build projects as the priority for this extra increased spending. Staff has estimated it will take $25 million to fund the entire 5-year plan. Please encourage the council to fund the entire program and speed up its implementation. Lives are at stake. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Diane?
Thank you. Honorable council members, I'm a longtime District 6 resident, and I'm a member of the Vision Zero San Jose Coalition and the Bike Coalition. I am also a member of your Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, but I may not speak as a member of them. I'm also a member of the Almaden Cycling Touring Club and San Jose Bike Party, but I'm speaking as a community member. I ask respectfully for you to approve the new mega improved action plan. I congratulate Team DOT and Jesse for really improving from the last one. You know, we've heard of white privilege, but there's also motorist privilege. I think people in our city, especially when you go in these corridors, you can see, believe they have the right to go as wherever they want, whenever they want, as fast as they want, and it's killing us. And I know it would be it's going to be expensive to change the infrastructure of the streets and slow them down. It will be expensive and unpopular, but it will save lives. And it may get more people, more motorists on buses and on the public transportation that we're all trying to improve. You have a messaging that says, you know, drive slow. How about you're killing us, slow down. Anyway, thank you so much for this. I bike in District 6 and 7 and 3 all the time. And you just see how fast people are going, and I thank you for your attention, and I thank you for lifting us up and making Vision Zero meaningful, where in the past it hasn't had a lot of spin behind the ball. So thank you so much, respectfully to you, council members.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Fred Buzo. I'm here on behalf of AARP California, but I'm also a resident of San Jose in District 9. And obviously, you know, this is something that's important to older adults around the country. This is routinely, consistently ranks as number one of the top priorities of our members across the country, across the state, and across this county, and that is the desire to feel safe as they walk on their streets. And because when they don't feel safe, they don't walk. They don't visit friends. They don't visit family. They don't go to the places that they need to go to. Walking is the second most popular mode of transportation among older adults, and many times, you know, they walk to those places that they have to go to. And when they can't do it and they don't feel safe, they stay at home. And so I want to commend DOT and other city staff for recognizing how much of an impact this has on older adults. And you know, thank you, Jesse. The first time I met with you, you made that a point, and I really appreciate seeing this presentation today. And so as you move forward, though, I want you to also consider that there are so many factors that go into why these numbers are going up. And so I appreciate the fact that you know, San Jose Police Department is here and is listening and wants to do everything that they can to reduce the number of traffic fatalities. But the number of traffic enforcement officers is one factor. And so I think if you look at data going beyond 2009, looking at data back into the 80s and 90s, we had a huge number of traffic citations being issued, and yet, you know, number of pedestrian deaths was still somewhat high. So when this comes back to City Council, I would actually ask that we get some of that data going back to the 80s and 90s on traffic enforcement, violations and citations, and traffic fatalities presented so that we can also take a look at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a second, Robin. After Robin will be Teresa Doe, Nikita Sina, Mr. Kirkpatrick, I think, and Christopher Stamps.
In 2015, San Jose city leaders pledged to reduce traffic fatalities to 0 and passed action plans just like this one to get us there. But since then, annual traffic deaths have gone up by 50%. You've heard from families who we have failed. You've heard about friends, parents, and children who went out the door in the morning and didn't return in the evening. The data presents a clear picture. Our plans have failed. Other Vision Zero cities, like San Francisco, have been successful in reducing traffic deaths. Other cities have taken bold and creative steps. What is presented here today is unfortunately neither. Instead of analyzing what went wrong, this plan doubles down, in some instances outright copy and pastes from what hasn't worked or wasn't sufficient in the past. Analyze crash data, projects on priority corridors, expand traffic enforcement, coordination with stakeholders. These are all action items from the 2015 action plan. They're not wrong, but these are basics, and as the last few years have shown, they are not enough. Putting plastic bollards on Monterey Road is not a systematic approach to reduce fatalities citywide. Not wrong, but not enough. We need to think bigger. Especially our seniors are getting killed. Yes, they walk after dark. They sometimes cross streets mid-block or are on their phones. I don't care. I don't care if they wear all black ninja costumes. If you can't avoid hitting abuelas while you drive, you're going too fast or shouldn't be driving at all. We live in a world where putting Mayorly Card in the hospital will set you back a few $100 and a traffic ticket. That is not an adequate deterrent. This watered-down version of a plan is not enough. Instead of spending $300,000 for a consultant to do communications outreach for a plan that is not enough, take the same money and hire an outside consultant to present you with a different plan overall. A plan that is bold, creative, and based on best practices, and that rises to the difficult challenge before us. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Sure. Good afternoon. My name is Teresa Doe, and I am Community Outreach Assistant for Walk San Jose and a lifelong resident of District 7 in San Jose. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. Maria Vu Thiluan was born on June 20th, 1934. She died on December 18, 2019 at the age of 85. Not from old age or natural causes, instead she was hit and killed while crossing Center Road in a marked crosswalk, making it to the center island when the light changed from green to red. She tried to make it across the intersection, but was hit by a car and later pronounced dead at the scene. As someone who has lived along Center Road my entire life, I know firsthand how dangerous this road is and how often people speed. But this should have never happened. The 60 fatalities in 2019 should have never happened. These families shouldn't have lost their loved ones to something that was truly preventable. And this is why we need immediate action to make sure that tragedies like this never happen again. As our city's leaders, we're calling on you to increase the proposed amount of funding for the Vision Zero Safety Investment Program from $6.78 million to $20 million, and shorten the timeline of quick build improvements to 2 years so that we can address the increasing number of fatalities on our streets. This investment would allow for a more holistic approach to infrastructure that would create a safer San Jose, rather than the standard plastic and paint. It would facilitate the process of signal retiming along priority safety corridors, including Center Road, that would give pedestrians enough time to cross and fund rapid response teams to investigate and consider safety improvements at the site of traffic fatalities. Let 2019 be the last year that we hear stories like this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Nikita, and I'm the Walk San Jose Program Manager with California Walks. I'm also a lifelong resident of San Jose District 1. Thank you for the opportunity to comment and to staff for your hard work on the action plan. As you know, 2019 was a record-breaking year for traffic fatalities. 29 pedestrians, 7 bicyclists, and 24 motorists were killed on our streets. Countless others were injured and will be physically and financially burdened for the years to come. This is an alarming trend and reflects the trend that San Jose is becoming a more dangerous place to walk or bike. An investment of $6.78 million over the next year and a half, as proposed, is an investment of $113,000 for each life lost last year. Is that what a life is worth? In the wake of these alarming numbers, we're asking you to take more urgent action. Direct the administration to pursue a more aggressive Vision Zero safety investment program of $20 million over the current and following fiscal year. Increasing funding over the next 1.5 fiscal years will allow for 2 things. First, infrastructure improvements will include much-needed elements, such as a rapid response team, using quick-build improvements at the site of fatalities, and as Jesse mentioned, signals and signal retiming. Second, it will allow for quick-build improvements on the priority safety corridors to actually be made quickly, as quick-build is intended. The posters in the audience represent each of the 36 people killed walking and biking last year. In addition to these 36, 24 motorists died on our roads last year. I encourage you all to take a closer look and learn about the traffic fatality victims of 2019. They are not just data points, they are people with families and friends who miss them dearly. Honor those who have been killed in crashes by taking immediate action towards making infrastructure improvements. Thank you for the opportunity to comment, and I look forward to working together.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Bill Kirkpatrick. I reside on 2nd Street between Julian and Empire in Councilman Perales' district, where I have been biking and walking for a considerable period of time, and I bring you a report from the front lines. This is a very dangerous city, and I appreciate the effort that's being made here today. I particularly appreciate the presence of the police, which goes a long way to assuage my heretofore belief that this is a low priority with the San Jose PD. So I'd like to make a couple of points. It distressed me greatly to listen to the previous presentation on the urgent need for maintenance of city streets, and I did not hear one word of any coordination between the proposed maintenance and the Vision Zero program. A great deal can be done to protect the public safety by taking advantage of necessary maintenance to build in safety features. There are not 2 different cities, one city that needs a maintenance program and one city that needs Vision Zero. They're the same place. I'd also like to point out a personal peeve of mine, which is, will you please get these electric scooters off the sidewalks? And I think the best thing that any of you can do, or all of you, if you have not already, start walking and biking the districts in which you live or the neighborhoods in which you live. I think you'll be appalled. I have some homework for each one of you. Some afternoon when you get lonely and bored, about 4 o'clock, go to the intersection, I recommend King and Tully Road, and try to cross the street. My only concern about this proposed plan is it's not urgent enough. I think that point has been made before, but it's a lot of good work, and please continue. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Christopher Stamps, Brendan Alvarado, and Blair Beekman. Christopher Stamps, are you still here? Brandon, come on up.
Good afternoon, council members, city staff, and the Vision Zero team. Thank you to the Vision Zero team for all the great work you guys are doing. And I'm sure most of you guys know here by now, I'm a huge fan of the Vision Zero team. My name is Brandon Alvarado, and I am a San Jose City resident. I'm also the organizer for the San Jose Ride of Silence event that we have. The San Jose Ride of Silence is an organization that raises awareness of traffic safety through organized rides. I'd like to make a couple quick points and then share a quick story when I get enough time, hopefully. So the first point I'd like to make is, in reviewing this plan and knowing how big our city is, I do agree that I think we need even more resources than the funding that was recommended. So, 20 million sounds good based on the other community comment, but just basically more resources and being as aggressive as we can there. I really appreciate the law enforcement's effort into this process and them acknowledging the fact that they are a huge part of the problem, or the part of the challenges that we are facing here. And I would like to see a dramatic change in the law enforcement, as they've already mentioned thereafter. So if we saw double the increase in the TEU last year. Let's see 3 times that amount this year. And it needs to be quick, as some of the other people have mentioned. I also like to see some more education efforts and awareness throughout our city that reaches to motorists. A quick story that I have is I went for a run this morning, and I was really shocked at what I was seeing as I was thinking about what I might say in this meeting today, because in my run I was thinking through the lens of traffic safety, and I ran around an elderly lady in an intersection on the east side of town. I ran around somebody in a wheelchair, an elderly person in a wheelchair. I almost got hit by a car, and the only reason I didn't get hit by that car that wasn't paying attention was because I know and I'm familiar with the roadways, and I guess I just realized how many vulnerable people are out there that have no idea how dangerous our streets are. And I go out there as an able body who can run through our streets as a fast pedestrian, and even I am fearful of our streets. So we'd like to see those numbers going down. Thank you for your effort, and please just increase the amount of resources we can have for this work.
Thank you. Blair, did you want to speak on this item? You had 2 D2 cards, so I guessed. This is D3.
Hi, thank you. In how care and good practices can raise all boats together in San Jose and across the country in 2020, I hope it can be realized we are at important beginnings of how accountability and open democratic practices can create more peaceful, better reasoned, sustainable community future. This can very much explain the philosophy of Vision Zero. From this, I hope there will want to be a need to open public policies and more responsible minimal use practices for technology, surveillance, and data collection for the future of SJ Vision Zero. The time is here we are allowed to again learn what can be, oh, I'm sorry, that's what I just read. No, I'm sorry. The time is here we're allowed again to what can be good government practices that can allow simpler, more accountable, and more efficient practices for both the public and the government themselves. From this, I feel there's a fairly good Vision Zero 2020 program for San Jose, and there are many within local government and community learning good initial Vision Zero concepts of community harmony and environmental sustainability, with technology and law enforcement having only a smaller, more auxiliary role. This is part of the initial vision of Vision Zero. The current T&E committee since November 2019 and now have taken its numbers of traffic enforcement officers as varied from 24 to 32 to 42, when in fact SJPD and Vision Zero goals of 50+ officers may already will already be achieved by the end of this year. These are pre-2010 SJPD levels. Can the city government of San Jose and SJPD learn how to give statistical numbers like this more clearly to the public in the future? It seems traffic fatality statistics and local newspaper reporting will take more time to make clear for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now turn to my colleagues. Councilmember Arenas.
First of all, I just want to thank everyone for coming in and for your comments, and also to recognize that there has been loss in our city on our streets, and my heart goes out to all of those family members who are sitting in this room today or who have known somebody who they've lost because of speeding or whatever other reasons. And so I'm really sorry for your loss, and I thank you for your advocacy and making sure that this continues to be at the forefront. So with that, I do have a question about the 11 miles that are supposed to be the city's priority safety corridors. I know we have a total of 56 miles. What are the 11 that are being prioritized?
With the $11 million, with the $4 million in the first year, actually $4.5 million, we will be able to review 11 miles of pavement work. That is capitalizing on projects, pavement projects like Center Road, Fruitdale, McLaughlin, and capital improvement projects, grant projects that are underway. Center Road is an example of that, where we have safety planning study that is to conclude this spring, and in it would be recommendations for capital improvement. We would take the opportunity with the pavement program this year on Center Road to apply the quick build treatments. So those are the top three that comes to my mind, but the priority corridors with the KSI would be prioritized, and where pavement projects and CIP projects could be capitalized, we would leverage them and get out as quickly as we can.
So there seems to be some formula there that you're using and taking a look at the fatalities, and then the type of projects, and then grant projects, I think. So my question is around, of course, my respective district. I have, and on the slide, I think, I don't know what number it is, but it's number 6, prioritize resources. So District A has a total of 20. We don't have these high incidents like maybe District 7 or even District 5. But the number of fatalities are still high. I mean, even though I have less incidents, I have a higher fatality than District 5. So, which tells me that either that there were higher speed incidents, right? If based on what you presented earlier, the higher the speed, the more likely the fatality. And I just anecdotally, I just can think of some of the streets that, because my district is a little more remote, and the streets are a little more remote, and they're very curvy and long and uninterrupted, that there's a lot of speeding. And I see it because I can see a lot of the car clubs or whatever they're calling themselves nowadays, but you know, they meet at certain places and then they take off from there and have races, right? And so my community has been seeing it a lot more often. We've seen it all the time. I've been living out there for 18 years, and so I know the streets that are popular for that. And so how would you tailor safety for my particular district, where it doesn't have the high number of incidents, but out of severe and fatal, I still have 20 deaths, even though there's 38 that were severe, and fatal and severe were 58. Where there's a higher number, or the higher percentage, I guess, of fatalities.
Sure. So in addition to the Priority Safety Corridor Investment Plan, we also have the Pedestrian Enhancement and Safety Funding Program, in which each council member, staff reviews with each council member locations of high crash. Yerba Buena is one of the locations that we've spoke of before. On the list in your district, we have Delta, Allenwood, and Altamar slated to be I don't know if it was crosswalk enhancement. I apologize for not remembering the exact details, but it is on our list of pedestrian safety enhancement work. We are going to get to all of the priority safety corridors, and it is our plan within 4 to 6 years, depending on our resources and our resources both internally and externally, as well as budget, to be able to get to all of the priority safety corridors. Our proposal today funds 1 year, 11 miles. And outside of that, our safety improvement program, the pedestrian safety improvement program, as well as our regular day-to-day addressing public's feedback or complaint-driven service requests, we continue to do so.
I appreciate that. I guess I still, for me, doesn't quite answer how the strategies differ from district to district. So for my district, it would be more high-speed.
Sure.
Right, fatalities. And then, I don't know, District 7, it might just be, I don't know, careless folks, or, I don't know how to categorize
Maybe
them.
if I can add one more thing. So as part of our public safety power shutoff program, we looked at corridors where speeding is of most concern. We placed, as this is an example of what staff has done in addressing different types of collisions or factors. And in that case, we schedule changeable message signs that advised motorists of the signal outage and to drive slowly. And this is understanding the characteristics of our streets where there are wide, curvy, vertical grades, speeding, and applying appropriate treatment and taking opportunities to capitalize on projects, either pavement or grant projects. So those are always our tools and our ways of making sure that the safety is applied everywhere in the city.
Thank you. I know you're trying to make the most with what you have, and I completely respect that. But as you know, we're all representing a very distinct type of district and region and need. And so I would urge you to consider maybe some very specific strategies that have been found effective based on research or best practices for high-speed areas. I have a blend of both, right? Because I do have Tully and King in my district, and I'm waiting for Tully. That's going to be my next question. But I have an area where there's a lot of pedestrian traffic, and then an area where there isn't, and there's a lot of curvy, open, just wide roads that people love to speed on. So I would love to see more to have some more specific strategies, as I am concerned that the fatalities are still high considering the number of incidents that we have in that particular district. So that would be one. The second thing is, what is the status for the Tully pedestrian safety corridor? I'm looking forward to it. In the meantime, we have a lot of folks who are just, risking really their lives as they cross the street.
It's just the OBEC project?
Yeah.
The Tully project is currently under design, and it's scheduled to be completed at the end of this calendar year, with construction scheduled to start in summer 2021.
Design.
Design is to be completed this year, yes.
Oh, I thought I had heard construction this summer, and I was,
Design.
wow, that's great.
Design complete 2020 and construction.
We're almost there.
Summer
Yeah.
2020.
We're almost there. Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Those are my questions.
Thank you. Councilmember Esparza?
Yes, thank you. Let's see, I wanted to start off with a few things. First off, as the district with the highest number of fatalities and the combined fatal and severe injuries, one of the reasons I believe that is because the infrastructure hasn't been updated in a couple of decades. So if you go to the slide that has the priority geographies, you can see Story, King, McLaughlin, Tully, Center, Monterey. And so I appreciate that, for example, McLaughlin as a project is in process, which is going to be amazing when it's done. The Center Road Vision Zero meetings that we've had in the community, you've seen a high interest in the community. There's been a really good and variety of turnout, is because the residents are very passionate. They deal with it. Trying to cross the street is scary. The accident that we had at Center Needles in December is just heartbreaking. So I wanted to talk about the quick builds. So, for example, we have the pedestrian safety enhancements, but in the Center Needles example, that's already a huge, busy intersection, high traffic, has a light, crosswalk. That needs a lot more than just some paint. So in this scenario, how would the quick build enhance an intersection like that has seen not just the tragic accident from December, but a large number of accidents in that intersection?
Do you think we can bring you have access to the?
We're going to try and bring up a slide that's in PowerPoint on the desktop there, so we'll just be a moment.
Okay.
But I think that in a sort of general sense without an image, the intersection that occurred at has a, it is possible to get onto the refuge, although I would not call it a very sort of attractive pedestrian refuge island. That is one sort of design possibility. And another one is to go from 3 lanes in each direction to 2, which would open up some space in the roadway to narrow the crossing distance. That's one of the big ideas in Vision Zero, is narrowing crossing distances and making a very long crossing shorter. In the case of that fatality, which is a very sad story, that pedestrian started on the green and actually completed most of the crossing on the green and did not make it to the end of the crossing within the green. So if there had been places for that pedestrian to, not go the whole way, such as by stopping in the middle and waiting in the middle in a pedestrian refuge island, for example, that is something that could be done through this type of program. The image that we're putting on the screen now is from the planning study that's underway, and is sort of not an example of that location, because obviously it does not show a median island, as there is a little of there. But it is an example of the types of things that you can do using quick build. So it is, paint and bollards and those types of things. Obviously, the sort of long-term goal of these projects would be to go into a capital project, but the idea here is to use these inexpensive materials to do proof of concept and see how they work and see how the data changes. And you can do a lot of those things using paint and signs and bollards and so on. People are, as drivers, quite responsive to the markings that we put on the ground. And so once the designs are showing a change in the data, then we would pursue the grants to have them be the long-term change. But if there were things that we wanted to change after a design is in, you can still do that while it's in paint.
And so in terms of quick build, how quick is quick build, like in this scenario?
We'll have to see, really. We've only done one project so far in San Jose in quick build, which is the Better Bikeways project downtown. And so we have experience doing it in this area downtown, but doing it in a much grander number of miles over many more years. We hope it'll be fast. With other cities that have started doing this, basically, they begin a little bit slow, but as they get better at the process, they're able to do it faster. So I know, for example, that San Francisco has been able to bring it down to an amazingly short amount of time, but they have more experience than we do. So,
And we have visited those cities to learn from their implementation as well.
in fact, some of our staff who would like to be here today is currently in San Francisco learning about that process.
Well, that's good. Good to hear that. Because Center is, as we've all talked about, it's one of the streets I worry about. And as we've talked about in Vision Zero, in the public meetings that we've had, there's the Vietnamese American Services Center that is going to open at Center in Tully. And that is going to be a beautiful 4-story building for everyone from babies to seniors, with not a lot of parking, right? And so again, this is another reason why we really need to look at our vulnerable populations and some of the roads that we're already experiencing some difficulties on. So that's what I'll leave it with that. I wanted to also ask a question about the enforcement unit. If I could ask the police. So again, in looking at the slide on, which slide is it? It's the priority geographies, the one with the map. I forget what slide number it is. There we go. So the most of the priority safety corridors, as you can see, are in Police District Lincoln. So, which is already the city's busiest police district. And so you talked about taking, we have our 10 traffic enforcement unit officers. And then you mentioned taking officers who are sort of in between or riding around, also enforcing traffic. I just wanted to point out, my concern is that we already have the busiest police district where people are just running from call to call. There isn't a lot of time to just kind of enforce traffic. What would the police, what would be some ideas or innovations that you would have sort of building on that model in a district like District 7 that also happens to be District Lincoln?
So it's obviously an excellent question in regards to, District Lincoln, because we do certainly recognize not only from a traffic standpoint, but from a calls for service standpoint, I would say District Lincoln far outweighs almost any other police district there is. So actually just here in part of the staffing plan that we're talking about is we've known for a while that District Lincoln needed more officers. We've actually just, at the March shift change coming up, there will be more officers going out to District Lincoln specifically. And while these numbers may not be grand, we're chipping away at it, and every officer out there is an extra officer that can be responsible for that. We do certainly know that in certain parts of the day, there are times when quite frankly, police officers could do traffic enforcement. In Lincoln, it's few and far between, but there certainly is times. And I think more out of anything, it is the knowledge for the divisional captains, to the lieutenants, to the sergeants that are out there specifically in patrol, knowing the data that we are seeing, that it's also passed down again to those Lincoln officers. Because there are times when they're going to see something, they're going to know, okay, this specific corridor is having these issues specifically to, whether it might be a stop sign violation or a red light violation, and where they may have issued a warning before, or while, they may have just, looked at it and the thing continued on, they actually make a concerted effort to go out there and at least make contact with that person, whoever they may be, and get that message across. And as we all know, when officers are out there doing enforcement, or at least even making contacts, people slow down, people see what's going on, and while it may not be during swing shift hours, the message gets out. And adding to that is also, we have seen now, I think, more so than any, putting the radar signs out. Those things are being deployed more than we've ever done that before. More than double than the requests are coming in, and specifically these vulnerable areas. And one of the big things, and as you guys know, we go to these community meetings, the community's very vocal on this stuff, and we do listen, and we do put them out. So while we're using the data from Vision Zero, we're also expanding upon that to the meetings that we go to where these vulnerable neighborhoods are, and specifically these areas that we're talking about with the high KSI factor ratings.
Thank you, that's very helpful. And one of the things I have done actually is reached out for traffic enforcement, particularly around some hairy intersections around schools. There's actually a couple of them on Center Road, again, where there needs to be some mitigation, but it's school drop-off and pickup are a great time to have additional traffic enforcement. I wanted to make one last point of something that I didn't see included in the task force or in the final slide so I didn't see it in the task force makeup or in the proposed funding actions. I wanted to point out, I have gone through and read the reports of the past few years for Vision Zero in terms of, even though it's not a lot in there, particularly between the pedestrian or car, the time of day, and the location, I can make some inferences and have gone out and looked at some of the locations. And it's pretty clear to me that some of the accidents in District 7 anyway are related to homeless encampments. In fact, I've witnessed one recently, or not recently, a couple months ago. And there should be some coordination with the homeless outreach team and monitoring and looking at encampments. For example, there's an encampment near Kirtner 87 where people will come out at certain hours and get hit or, have these accidents. You hear that a lot in your district as well. And so we need to loop in our homeless outreach team and loop in them as a resource, because I don't believe that that's something that we're going to, pavement is not the solution to that. And so we need to have that kind of coordination on some of these issues, or, we'll continue to lose lives, unfortunately. So I'm hoping that we can loop them in. And with that, I'll stop at this time. Thank you.
So we can respond a little bit about the homeless population. We have some slides at the appendix slides. And I'll just tell a little sort of story about what we were thinking about, because this issue has come up, and it's obviously an interesting issue to talk about. So a little bit, so we have, first off, we had mentioned in the presentation that the data points to older adults. So we have, in the last 2 grant years for the Office of Traffic Safety, which is a California agency, applied for grants specifically on that topic, and we developed the media in the top right corner of the slide with that, using 1 grant year. And in the current grant year, we've hired California Walks as a consultant to do senior pedestrian outreach, and that work is just about to begin. For the next grant year, the application was just due last week, and the issue area that we wanted to look into is this one. And so I called other Vision Zero cities to ask what they've done on it, and it's actually like not an area that has much work done yet. There's certainly interest, and that interest is in San Francisco and Austin. But I basically sort of tried to see what people have done, and not much yet. But let's move on to the next slides. Not this one, keep going. So the Santa Clara County Medical Examiner Coroner published a report on their website using 2011 to 2016 data, and this is the cover of the report, which seems topical because it's clearly under a freeway structure. And in that data, you can see that there's a 150% increase in fatalities involving homeless people in the data years in the county, 2011 to 2016. And if you look on the slide that's on the right here, the cause of death, vehicle accidents, there's a 225% increase in fatalities involving homeless people caused by vehicle accidents, 4 in 2011 and 13 in 2016. And overall, traffic fatalities account for about 10% of homeless fatalities in Santa Clara County in that data. The next slide. So the idea was to get the data for the city of San Jose, and so requested, basically sent cases over from 2017 to 2019, and we had 19 suspected fatalities involving homeless people, but according to their strict definition, 10 of those were verified homeless. And so 9 of them are pedestrians, 1 of them is a cyclist. And if you look at that number in those years as percentage of overall pedestrian fatalities in San Jose, they represent 17% in 2017 and 2019. And this is a map of where they are, and they are centered in District 7. And as a result, and sort of by doing this research, we went and did outreach. Basically, we talked to organizations in San Jose that work with the homeless population, and I spoke at a lived experience board of formerly homeless people, and I also talked to a few other organizations. So basically, we've put together, if we get this grant, an idea of how we could do outreach to that population. But also, I think this is a good example of some of the relationships that are new for us that are, certainly could be a lot more fruitful as we move forward with them. The first is the relationship with the medical examiner coroner, who helps us get the data. And then the second is all of the organizations that we've never worked with before, but we could work with in the future. And we also spoke to the outreach consultant that San Francisco uses for Vision Zero safety messaging to see if they could, how much it would cost to get them to craft a message basically that would work with this population. So we have those numbers now too.
I think this is also the type of relationship we want to build in our task force and the agencies that are invited to be part of the membership.
Thank you. Thank you for putting all that together. That's really helpful. Thanks.
Councilmember Perales.
Thank you. I appreciate the presentation as well. And thank you again for our speakers that came out, especially shedding light on individuals that lost their life. And I know that we're going to give you some time at the council meeting when this comes, as we spoke about it the last time, to be able to actually list all those individuals by name. So thank you for bringing that today. And Dave, thank you for bringing light to that as well on your perspective, because I know that it can get lost at times when we're just talking about it as data, but I know how much it means to officers as well that end up having to go out there on these scenes, sometimes the first responders, and treating a lot of these individuals that either may die from their injuries or that they may be able to help. And that's a real part of the job that our officers are doing as well. And so to your point, I know that it is important to officers to try and just prevent them altogether and not have to go out in these accidents. In regards to what we just talked about, only because it's very fitting, there's discussion going on, there has been discussion going on for a couple of years, as I've been advocating for a coordinated effort between city staff and county staff in addressing homelessness with a ongoing, more permanent task force. And it just happens to be getting some daylight as well at the county through a memorandum from Supervisor Dave Cortese last week. And I followed up with some lobbying efforts because they're calling for a 9-month task force, and I'm asking for that to go on indefinitely until we can actually solve that problem. But it speaks to exactly this point, which is so much work is being done around the issue of homelessness, but it's being done in silos, and now we talk about this in traffic fatalities and how there's an overlap in that. And I think it's fitting as well, because one of the things we're talking about, knowing that this is such a crisis, once again hitting that high number of 60 fatalities, that we are talking about coming together more collaboratively on a quarterly basis to address this with a task force. And I think that is poignant as well with the issues of homelessness. You talk about 161, I don't know the exact numbers for San Jose, but 161 individuals that were experiencing homelessness last year in the county that died in our streets. Both crises that I think do call for these levels of actions, and specifically the coordinated efforts. So I want to echo what Councilmember Esparza said. Thank you for already beginning some of that coordinated effort. And as you stated, that this would be some of the work that we can take up with the task force, knowing that it's more than just implementing some infrastructure improvements in the road. There's a lot more going on here. And thank you as well for already being able to respond to some of the items in my November memo from last year. And I appreciate that incorporated in at least the discussion here today. In regards to the police department, I had a recommendation in the memorandum that I had, and I was asking for, excuse me while I go back to it. The third item I asked for was to return, and I didn't give a specific date, to a future TNA meeting with a plan of action to fill the vacancies in TEU. So I know you didn't present on that today. When would we expect to hear that response?
Next week, Chief Garcia is going to address a portion of that. As you know, there's staffing in TEU and there's staffing in the police department as a whole. I think he's expecting to present more of a global outview on where that looks. As we said before, and as we'll continue to say, I mean, we will look at everybody that's coming out. We deal with a lot of times the things that are put in front of us. We know that December and January for us was a huge retirement. Group went out, both through just retirement and then through attrition. So we're constantly balancing the numbers as far as who's leaving and replacing those bodies when they start coming in with other officer spots. So just to give it an exact plan, it's a little difficult because there are certain aspects to it that when we look at it from a staffing perspective, it is filling those holes. But we do know that the chief has spoken outwardly as far as what that number would look like and when we put it in. We're going to continue to, as we can, and it's hard to just give a definitive time on it. I know he's going to speak to it next week, and I think that will give a little more clarity to it.
Okay, yeah, that's, I recognize it's not easy, but what I would like would be a deadline to be able to hold, right, feet to the fire, and to say, okay, this is the time that we expect to have a better answer in regards to, I understand there's the global, right, staffing issues with the police department, but specifically on this item, and I'd like it to have, be heard within one of our committees here, just on that piece. So then once the chief has it figured out, that way somebody can come from the police department to present here and talk about, well, here is specifically what we'll be doing and what the plan of action is for restaffing TEU. And I know that another piece of this, and Councilmember Esparza brought it up, and you did respond to it in regards to this March shift change, how there will be maybe some more officers in District Lincoln. But I know the chief was working on redistricting, correct?
He is, but as you know, that's a very, very long process that certainly costs some money to do. There's talks already about that, at least from the fiscal perspective, on how much it's going to cost. It's been a long time since we have redistrict, but examples of District Lincoln are a district that sorely needs to be redistricted and probably split into two. So the ways that we're looking for it, I mean, to speak to that point, as the numbers continue to grow in District Lincoln, we may add another sergeant in Lincoln alone, just to deal with that span of control over the officers that he has in there. So certainly things like that, we're certainly cognizant of, as calls for service continue to go, as they're in specific geographical areas. While it may take a little while to redistrict, there's certainly things from a staffing model that we can look at in doing that. The chief has also spoken about, and again, these are just numbers, and I think you'll go into it next week, but the addition of officers as we get them in the ranks. And he has said before that, in his mind, and again, it's subject to change and can be moved around, but for, let's say, every additional 20 officers that San Jose gets, 2 or 3 or 3 or 4 may end up going to TEU. So there are those kind of plans that as we continue to look forward and anticipate staffing moving forward, then those bodies will be slotted for specific units like TEU.
So we don't have a timeline then yet on the redistricting either?
No, I think it looks, again, there's so many different components on it that goes from the redistricting, the remapping. A lot of it, what it comes into is even from communications from their standpoint, drawing boundary lines, CAD systems as far as how calls are made in. We would love to do it as soon as we could. But again, a lot of it, what it comes into is number one, funding, which it gets expensive to do that, and then incorporate all the different elements that go through it before you can just flip the switch and do the redistricting. I know the chief has talked about plans this year. I think it will come up in the budget cycle and talking about moving forward and what that is going to look like. And then additionally, staff is already looking at, okay, when we start seriously thinking about this as we are right now, what are the different components to that? We've done it before. We do have a kind of a book on how we would do it again. Again, it's just going to be looking at the data from there on where would we redistrict and what essentially police districts would be affected by that and how could we do it.
So safe to say we haven't officially started that process then yet. So we're just thinking about it at the moment, but there's no funding to it.
I'd say in our minds, we've already started it. On paper, we've already started it. But as far as getting to on the drawing board, I think we've already started it. I think we know the roadmap to get there. It's just going to take getting it delineated out to get there.
Okay. Similarly, I think to the other component here, because I do think that we need to redistrict, and there are certain areas of the city, certainly, and we can address some of those, as you've stated, with staffing one-offs right now. But I think this is something we need to do, and so what I would like to at least see would be when we are actually going to start this. So this comes to the city manager's office as well, right? Which would be if this is requiring funding and at least to lay out the process. We don't even have an idea yet how long this will take from what I'm hearing. But at least I'd like to know that we can say, okay, we officially started the redistricting process. We think it could take a couple years, but we're going down that route rather than right now. I know that the chief has sort of initiated things as was stated on his end, but I'd like to see that this is something we can formally go out and know that it's the wheels are rolling on it, and we'll have a better update maybe as it's going to get an understanding. Okay, we think it is going to take 18 months, right, or 2 years. So I don't necessarily need the end date today, but I'd at least like to know what the start date is.
Yeah,
So-
fair enough. You know, what Dave has described, just building on that, before the meeting, city manager, chief, and all of us met to kind of prepare for this. The chief did indicate he wants to put traffic enforcement staffing in overall police department kind of staffing and a lot of different priorities, as Councilmember Esparza kind of noted. So I think everything Dave has described there is accurate. From this committee scheduling standpoint, we will be back in May with the annual safety report. The budget process would have unfolded to kind of the city manager's proposed budget at that point in time. So we'll reflect on the redistricting schedule and see where the chief and the city manager are at on that and have that, you know, on our minds as we come back in May.
Okay, thank you. And I know that it sounded like it was described in regards to some of these quick build, this first $4 million, the opportunity to use that we are actually, because I know the comment came from the public, we are actually trying to pair that up with some of our pavement maintenance projects through correct?
Yes.
Yeah, we do it all the time.
And we do that all the time, that we are,
Yes.
right, not thinking in silos in that regard, that if we have an opportunity with some of those infrastructure improvements, that we can tag these on with it. The ask here, this is talking about the 4 million for quick build. Are we talking about dollars that are already there and accessible? And then it looks like an additional 20 to maybe 22 million, if you can tell me if that's includes the 4 million or not, or if it would be on top of that 4 million. That's money we don't have, so if you can just.
Yeah, so what we're talking about here is, next week, we'll have a supplemental memo that'll lay this out in more detail. But it's, in essence, these are funds that both came from the mayor's budget memo last year for the Story Keys, and that was a 1.3. And then this is some, we're fortunate to have a higher construction excise tax forecast for this current fiscal year. So this is it'll be mid-year budget. We didn't know about it until we just got this forecast. So it is money we did not have when we started the budget year, so we're assigning it to this work in this year.
Okay, so
Going
the
forward, we're gonna be
5 points,
looking
whatever
for-
million, we
right.
have that. Going forward, you said additional 22?
18.
18,
So
so
the
what-
remaining
so there's a
20 million
remaining.
or so.
Okay.
We're still looking for where we're gonna be securing that in the upcoming proposed budget and then beyond. So there'll be a number of places we'll be looking for, including grants or trying to find that within our traffic capital, similar types of funding like that, so.
So let's say, for instance, we were able to get to 18 million next year for these. Do we have the capacity to implement quick builds on these projects in that fiscal year?
So that was the second part of that request, is put more money and do it faster. And capacity is going to be an issue. We are forming a quick build team to dedicate people, both city staff and consultant resources, to get going on this. Being able to do 5 years of work in 2 years probably is too much, but I think we're going to look at seeing what we can do once we form that team, get consultant resources underway, to see if we can do it faster than 5, but I can't tell you that we'll be able to do it in 2. We'll look at seeing what we can accelerate and what's reasonable.
Just for clarity, John, though, the two different elements of that slide on funding, that was to do a 5-year program.
Yes.
So.
Yes.
And, okay, so your point is, what would it take to accelerate?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'm also just curious
It's
if we
getting
did land
started- it's
the
getting
dollars,
started
could we
on it.
even,
Right.
could we even accomplish that
Yeah.
within, a
So
shorter
the two
period
pieces,
of
we
time?
got to get the
Yeah.
funding for future, and
Yep.
we're going to start it and get going on it, and then see how fast we can go.
The estimate is also based on leveraging pavement program. If we were to advance it in, say, 18 months or 2 years with a pavement project, a lot of our work would be throwaway as well. So which is key in capitalizing on pavement program. Once it's done, we move in and do as little as throwaway as possible.
Yeah, no, I
Makes
would
sense.
agree. That goes back to the first part on the coordination, the fact that we do coordinate, it all plays a factor. So it's not just the dollars, even if we were to land those dollars, there's capacity and there's coordination
Yeah.
that is gonna affect the timeliness of how quickly we can get something out. And I think, you've heard it, but certainly, I think, for representing a district that has some of the highest KSIs, I think, there's an initial reaction to that to want to be able to see how we can respond better and more equitably. And so I appreciate that we are trying to do that with some dollars. But I think to Councilmember Arenos's point, right, one person killed in a traffic fatality or pedestrian, whatever, right, is too many. And that's why we call it Vision Zero. And that's why we're really trying to get to that number. And the reality is that at the moment we don't have the resources, as we're talking even today, to address some of these high priority areas. And the trend is going in the wrong direction. So I do think it is important that we are strategic in how we do allocate those resources, what projects we're focusing on, areas that we know that are of really high concern, places where we can invest in that we're going to see the most bang for our buck. And I think the other thing that I think is a positive is the extremely high number of crashes in District 3. When you look at the 5,500, I call it a positive because look at how far of an outlier that is to the others, but yet we're not so far of an outlier, right, in regards to the fatalities and the severe, right? We're up there with the others, but not somehow what you might equate, wow, that's double. And the reason why is because the speeds in a downtown core, right, are much lower. And another benefit, as I constantly go out and tell people, and I know that there's a lot of individuals that are still single occupancy vehicle advocates that get frustrated when we eliminate a lane and put in a bike lane. They get frustrated anytime there is something impeding their ability to, move as quickly as possible in their vehicle. I am all for traffic, especially in a downtown core, and for the main part, actually, is to get people out of their cars, right, and take other modes of transportation. But this is another benefit. The fact that you can have actually so many crashes, but yet not that same level of increase in regards to people that are severely hurt. It's just simply because of the speed. Now, granted, the geography of the district is much, we don't have the expressways and stuff anyways, but at the same time, I think that is a major factor to point out. And I bring it up with this, when I looked at, and I haven't ridden a bike, which now looking at it, I wouldn't, but on Center and Needles. I have ridden a bike, though, down Winchester all the way from my parents' house, which is the border of Campbell, so Hamilton. And I won't do that again. It reminds me of this kind of Center and Needles, right? Where literally there's nowhere safe. And when we put in some of these improvements, like eliminating a vehicle traffic lane and putting in a bike lane, it also allows us to make these improvements for pedestrians, sort of like the twofold benefit that we get out of that. For years, my community members along the Vine and Almaden corridor, which pre-87 was the north-south corridor, had hoped for their 2000 Measure A, funds to be able to decouple those streets. And as, literally almost, couple decades now have gone by, but when I started 5 years ago, a decade and a half, that work had not been completed, and it looked like it wasn't going to be done, and that the dollars there would not be sufficient anytime soon to be able to actually make that a reality. So what we did do, we came in and found out, well, what could we do to help just make it better, right, for pedestrians and bicyclists? That included eliminating a lane in certain sections. It included narrowing the lanes. It included the improved or enhanced crosswalks in certain sections. All things that when you look at even just like a road like Center or Winchester or other areas, once we make those areas complete street friendly, right, we have now taken what is a road specifically catered to the vehicle and now made it safer for everybody. And I guarantee you then, as we know, that the result is going to be we're going to see an extreme decrease in these KSIs in those areas. And so the quick builds, I'm really an advocate of because I think we've seen how well they've worked out around the downtown core. Had some bumps, right, as you would with any of these major improvements. But for the most part now, as people have gotten a chance to understand and how they work, if you're a pedestrian or a bicyclist, you go around some of these streets, especially a street like 4th Street, Fourth Street used to be, when I was at school in San Jose State, in certain sections, I think it had 4 lanes, but it was this, you know, thoroughfare where people were just jamming through, right, to get to the freeway. Nobody could care less as you're going by MLK Library, which had just opened, and all the students crossing by and all the residents living in the area, just gunning it to hit the freeway. And when you go through that corridor now, and you got these narrow 2 lanes and bike lanes on either side, and you know the bulb outs, or at least where the green bollards are, right, coming out into the street at the intersections, making literally the crosswalk that you have to cross thing, you know, making the crosswalk. I thought I was going to give.
Not my purse.
Not my purse. Sorry. The length that you have to cross, right, on those intersections is so narrow, and it's in my mind that's just that if we can now replicate that with some of these quick builds and some of these other areas of concern, we will have alleviated a lot of our problems. So I too am an advocate, like we're hearing from the advocates here on, well, could we not address all these as soon as possible? I know from staff you would like to, and that's what we'll be advocating for. Personally, I'll be advocating that I can sit on, if not maybe chair this task force, and be able to push these items through and continue the focus, because I do think this is a real priority that we need to be addressing. We're going in the wrong direction, as we know. And lastly, I do appreciate the slide on the drive slow seniors crossing. As we had pointed out in my memo in November, that the focus a lot of times is on children and youth, which perfectly fine, but when you think about it, not everybody has children, or has had children, or is going to have children. But everybody either has or has had a parent, right? And so and will have potentially, right, a senior, or has that in their life. And so it's just being able to hit another demographic of individuals that are out there driving around on our street. We all think that somehow the youth or the children triggers us, but it doesn't actually trigger everybody. And so this now, I think it just hits another area, and so I do appreciate that. And you know, I'm hoping that the direction we can move is the opposite of where we've been going, and I look forward to the work. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Arenas, did you have another question?
Yes, I did. I actually was thinking about Capitol Expressway, because I do have a large portion of that Capitol Expressway. And I know it's a county road, or Capitol Expressways. It's not under our purview, but the surrounding streets are. And so I wonder, and I know that around Capitol Expressway, we also have a lot of fatalities. Is there any plans to also kind of beef up around the expressway and some of the very high use areas like Silver Creek / King and Capitol Expressway, or?
Yeah, task force. One of the first ways, I don't know, one of the first ways, I would say in my 27 years as a traffic engineer, I've always had easy reach to county traffic engineer. I can call Anoth and have a conversation about traffic signal timing, anything but capital improvement. But I say that, but I'm very hopeful as part of the task force membership that we will start to raise some of the things we're doing here at the city. Last few years, as we have been scoping some of our major projects, development related, county had been amenable to removing the free right turn lanes, bulbing out the corners. They're coming more, I'd say, agreeable, amenable to treating intersections more completely. And I think that this conversation at the task force will help to elevate the issue more. We do share the crash reports and the crash data, and we have commitment from the Director of Roads and Airport, Harry Freitas, to take part in the task force.
I'm sure he'll be a great advocate. And who, in terms of an elected official, is going to be part of that, if anybody, for the county?
Not
their side.
Not for the county, but we are looking for an elected official to chair the task force.
Yeah.
Would be probably a city council person.
Sure. I just think that I did hear a volunteer.
Yes, I didn't want to jump to any assumptions.
And nobody else is volunteering. Actually, I think Councilmember Perales will do a wonderful job if in fact he becomes that chair, or any one of my colleagues who has this interest and experience, of course. I think that we also should have kind of equal or on the other end in terms of county, because I think sometimes it does take political will, even though there is maybe department will or not. And I think if I could make a suggestion, since this is really impacting families, I don't know if I think at this point the chair is Cindy Chavez, and since this is impacting a lot of the seniors, I don't know if you want to bring in somebody from her office. Don't tell her that I suggested that.
You just volunteered them.
Right, but I think it just brings a different perspective in terms of how this impacts our families, because the seniors are, in my family, they're my caregiver, right? And so my mother-in-law does not drive, so she relies on public transportation when she goes and takes my little girl somewhere, and I know they are out there as part of some of these dangerous streets, and we want to make sure that we bring in, I think, that piece of it, and not just it be so transportation heavy, if you will. And I think that would create a good cohesion. But once again, I just want to emphasize that I think that there needs to be a strategy that is tailored for the different types of districts. And I was looking at the numbers where there's fatalities, and I saw, I think it was District 2, that similar crashes and similar fatalities and similar total fatal and severe KSIs. And I think it's the same, I think it's because the topography is kind of the same. We have these long and uninterrupted roads. And then I also have, of course, King and Tully, which is just heavy duty. And around those areas is Rigoletto and Huron. And some of those streets, I think it was Councilmember Esparza and I, we have one of the very few, or the first rumble strip. I know that they don't call them speed bumps anymore, right? Like in 11 years or so, because we had, or at least in my district, we had speeds that were comparable to freeway speeds, right? Because it's a kind of a cutout through for folks who want to get to 101 or avoid 101 and go to another entrance. So some of our neighborhoods are very susceptible, and I want to make sure that all of those things are kind of considered as you take a look at each of our respective districts, because the fatalities are the same whether I have 20 fatalities and only 58 total, and there's folks who have 17 fatalities but have 109. But those fatalities are the end of life for those folks. So I want to make sure that we prevent those as much as we can with some very tailored type of strategies for different districts. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I know everybody has mentioned it already up here, but I also want to just give my condolences. Every one of the 60 fatalities is a tragedy, and we are all cognizant of that fact and want to work as quickly as possible to get that number down to zero where it should be. And I think we've all kind of pointed it out, but very helpful, Deputy Chief Tyndall, to talk about the improved communication across the departments and how that's working. And Jesse, you mentioned it too, because this is not a political issue. This is really, it's a safety issue, and it's based on data. And as Councilmember Perales said, we want to strategically allocate the money where we can do the most good first, because we have to get that number down as best we can. And so I really appreciate the use of data and the improved communications across the departments to really work together to get this done. And I know there's already been talk about the pavement maintenance and Vision Zero coordination. And I can tell you, I know someone said it wasn't mentioned today. It's been happening for multiple years. We've had the pavement that's been, the bigger streets that have been done in my district over the last couple of years. Diane's nodding her head yes, because she knows. When we repave, we always, DOT always looks at re-engineering the street, because there's no street markings, right? It's a blank canvas. And so they always look at, okay, how wide is this street? What's happening on this street? How can we narrow it to basically engineer slower speeds, and also to make it so that there are choices for your mode of transportation. So they're already doing that, and that's not, even though they didn't mention it, it's baked into their culture at this point. I can assure you, and I know everybody up here has had those meetings with DOT when they come and say, okay, we're doing Bird Avenue, we're doing Minnesota, we're doing Heading. I'm sure you all have your own streets where, okay, we're doing this, and here's what we're thinking about re-engineering that street. So they're always looking at that, and I want to make sure that everybody is aware of that. As we were talking about the data, and Fred said something about enforcement and data kind of going back to the 80s and 90s, enforcement versus fatalities, it kind of brought up a question for me, looking at the KSIs in districts 7, 3, 6, and 5 are the highest. Those are the most walkable, most dense districts. And I'm thinking there might be enforcement differences and changes, but also, do we know how many autos, peds, and bikes are using those streets, and how that has changed over time? We've got to at least know vehicle traffic, right? But
We know that.
as we're re-engineering, do we have any kind of counts for when we re-engineer a street to make it safer for multiple modes? That also means we're likely increasing the volume, right? And so we have, again, I want to point out, every single death that we have is a tragedy. I also want to know if we're having increased fatalities on areas where we've already re-engineered, is it because it's not safe because we've re-engineered it, or is it because it's actually safer and the volume of traffic, pedestrian, and other modes of transportation has actually increased, and that doesn't mean it's a less safe area? Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I think I get your question. I don't think we have that full matrix of data yet.
Sure.
And since we've been doing some of these reconfigurations of our roadways, adding bike lanes.
Yeah.
We don't have all of that full yet, but that is exactly what we want to start to capture, not just for
Okay.
this reason, but we're trying to do it for performance reasons. And
Sure.
are we getting the change in mobility that we've always wanted? So we're trying to do that no matter what, but I don't think we have a full picture answering that kind of question yet.
Okay, so that kind of gets at someone commented about best practices, and it was making me think about, we do want to get people out of their cars, we do want more people biking, we do want more people walking, and we do know, as Councilmember Peralta said, we've got those single occupancy vehicle diehards. So we know that we're gonna have, when we have multiple modes, we have multiple sort of opportunities for collisions, right? And more KSI. So I'm wondering how we can just kind of tease out if anybody's done that, and how we can make those areas where we've made them multimodal and make them continue to be safe.
Right.
I don't want to be too arcane, but it made me think about that.
We totally understand. Yep.
Okay. And then I just want to, I think that the likelihood of fatality graphic, when you're hit by a vehicle traveling at 20, 30, and 40 miles an hour, I actually texted my communications person and I said, please put that on all our social media, because that's such an important graphic. If you could send that out to all of us, I think that's, I know we're gonna do outreach and all of that, but those 3 statistics are so powerful, and it might hopefully get some parent who's rushing to work and wants to drop off their kid, because I always hear that, oh, there's so much speeding around schools during drop-off time and pickup time. It might make some difference in just getting people to slow down a little bit, because it's huge. You save a couple of seconds, but you save, you could save a life instead of a couple of seconds. And I think that's such a this is such a compelling graphic to me. So I would hope that all my colleagues would put that up, and if you guys could send that out to us, and we're happy to push out that kind of stuff in our newsletters and on our social media. We've all got multiple channels and all that, and I just think it's a really important, those are such important statistics, and I actually say them all the time, and I didn't have this cool graphic, and I've been saying them actually at the last 3 community meetings I had in the last week, so thank you for that. I appreciate it. All right, I think we're looking for a motion and referral.
Move to approve and refer to the February 11th council meeting.
Second. Oh.
Councilmember Perales.
Last word.
Yes, sorry. It was in regards to this graphic. Based on what you just said, Chair, because I know that we, around school zones, can actually lower the speed limit below even the 25 mile an hour. This graphic, and knowing that we have it 25 miles an hour in the school zones, tells me, why do we have it at 25 miles an hour in the school zones, right? And why would we not go down to 20 or 15 like we can? Speaking to the importance of this graphic. So to your point on looking at it, on me looking at this, and I've advocated for this for a number of school zones around my district, but I think the reality should be we should be thinking about that citywide. And it should take no more than just looking at a graphic like this to say, what odds do we want to give, right, the kids and the parents and those walking around to and from school, and who would really argue that, right? And so, but it's a lot of times when we go out, and I know our PD can back this up, to issue tickets, right, or do citations in and around school zones, it's parents, it's teachers, principals at times, right? It's to that effect of hey, I'm just rushing, I'm trying. So I think, if we could do more to limit this graphic, and thank you, Deb, for pointing that out, help me to continue to push that.
Okay.
What would it take to proactively do that in our school zones?
Maybe our city traffic engineer will be able to, she's the expert on.
Laura?
Hi, is this
She
on?
snuck in here.
Yeah. So timely question. This past year, CalSTA convened a task force, a zero traffic fatalities task force, that was directed through, I believe it was Assembly Bill 2363 a year ago. And CalSTA.
State Transportation Agency.
Thanks, John. CalSTA, I was part of that task force. San Jose, we were fortunate, we were one of 7 cities in the state that were invited to be on the task force, and attended those meetings along with Jesse over the course of this past year. Anticipate that CalSTA's report of findings is going to come out this week, and based on an early version that we had seen, it includes some strong recommendations that would help cities, providing cities more flexibility on how speed limits are set, including around schools. Right now, if we want to establish a 15-mile-per-hour school zone, and it's only for streets that meet a certain conditions, current speed limit maximum of 30 miles per hour, current maximum of 2 lanes. And we'd have to do a study for each street that we want to bring forward to council to recommend for it to be lowered. One of the recommendations anticipate coming out in CalSTA's report is, why do we have to do a study? Just allow cities to establish a prima facie speed limit, as well as having greater flexibility to reduce the speed limits further than what we currently have the ability to do, for example, on high injury network streets. These are recommendations. They also, just very briefly, have strong information in there in support of automated speed enforcement. This report will be forwarded to the legislature in Sacramento. It does not have specific legislative language changes, but just a lot of legislature, you asked for this. We convened a task force, and here's all the, it's about an 80-page report. It's a very comprehensive report, and look forward to seeing the final version.
So will some of those key findings be in the supplemental?
If it comes out in time.
I know it's a tight timeline if it comes out this week.
The supplemental is primarily for the budget actions. If it comes out in time, and depending upon when, we definitely could make it part of our presentation and information.
Okay, cool. And then I just wanted to comment, you brought up the automated speed enforcement. We're continuing to pursue that in the legislature, right? And I'm looking at you, Dave, because you mentioned it. And then the question I had was, we don't have red light cameras, I don't think. Are we prohibited from doing red light cameras as well? That was one of the factors in KSI, so that's why I'm asking.
So I think it's all encompassing. I think there's certainly some groups out there that would not like this, including CHP's own Police Officer Association is one of the biggest, I think, obstacles to essentially getting through this. So to really just getting the right people up in Sacramento to be listening.
Okay.
I think we can get across it, because I think there are enough agencies. Obviously, the chief has talked to many of the large agencies in this state specifically about moving forward with that. There was overwhelming support for it. So I think it is just a matter of working with the state legislature and getting across the goal line.
Okay. I mean, just exempting the freeways might make that.
I don't think we would touch freeways.
All right. All right, we have a motion. Did we get a second? Councilmember Brawley, did you second? Oh, Sylvia did. Okay, great. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that motion carries. Thank you. And now we move on to item D4, city-generated tow services. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Lund left, he left, yeah.
Okay, I'll be here. I'll be here. So we have our three.
Ready to start?
Yep.
Go ahead, Rachel.
So good afternoon, Chair Davis and Council Committee members. I'm Rachel Roberts, Deputy Director of Code Enforcement. I'm here today with my colleagues Jennifer Chang, and our Deputy Director of Finance, as well as Captain Dave Santos with the San Jose Police Department. And we're here to present to you our status report on the city-generated tow services delivery model. So to provide some background and refresh our memories, in January 2019, the City Council accepted the audit of towing services and recommendations and the administration response, and directed staff to return to T&E in the fall of 2019 with a proposed tow service delivery model and status report. We were here at T&E in November to provide the status report on the city-generated tow services model, which the committee approved and directed staff to continue to refine the proposed service model and pilot program approach, explore an interim solution to provide financial relief to the 6 contracted tow operators, along with a commitment to ensure a responsive service, and then return to T&E in February with the final plan for implementation. So since our November 4th T&E committee meeting, staff got to work on the 3 phases of the pilot program implementation with a focus on the initial steps of identifying a recommendation for the interim financial relief, developing the scope of the technology and software and contract administration RFP, and continuing outreach with the existing tow operators to work through key challenges and find solutions to issues such as the tow refusals. Taking the program, the tow program from the current model through the pilot to the new service model will be an iterative process. As new information and data is obtained through the pilot, staff will need to revisit each of these 3 phases. For example, once the cost of the technology and software platform and contract administration is identified, further financial analysis will need to be done in order to recommend the appropriate fees for the operator, the city, as well as our customers, as part of the fiscal year 2021 budget to support the program. Additionally, various contract amendments will be needed to align the contracts with the requirements of the RFP and the associated costs. Thus, at this point in the process, it can be seen as the interim stage, providing essential bridge between our current model and the final model in which the outcomes of the pilot will continue to inform. So the initial step as part of the phase 1 financial analysis was to determine the recommendation for the interim financial relief for the tow operators. So the first step staff did was to conduct the financial analysis of all the fees, revenue, and budget associated with the tow program so that we could assess the current costs and revenues to the city operators and customers. We then reviewed the tow operators' current financial statements, which they provided, and applied an agreed-upon model that was used previously to determine the council-approved financial relief that was provided to the operators in 2017. And then we looked at, lastly, the current industry challenges, such as utilizing the data that was provided by the tow operators on the number of vehicles that went unclaimed by the registered owners, the number of vehicles that were junked or scrapped, and the number of vehicles that were lien sold. And we also looked at other factors such as labor and disposal costs. So after this analysis and discussion with the operator, staff concluded that financial relief to the tow operators was appropriate. And based on that, our recommendation was to decrease the contract compensation fee that is currently remitted by the operators to the city from $59 per tow to $41 per tow. We also determined that we should expand the list of qualified vehicles that are meet the criteria for reimbursement of disposal costs to include all vehicles rather than just the current list comprised of mostly RVs and trailers. And then lastly, we're recommending that we continue to credit the tow operators for expenses and lost profits related to the disposal of the qualified vehicles until their remittance reaches 0, which is part of our current contract. And all of this would be retroactive to January 1st through June 30th, 2020, with the option to extend. So this proposal is estimated to have a budget impact of approximately $200,000 to $250,000 for the fiscal year 1920 budget, which was noted in the memorandum. However, we do see this as a necessary impact in order to sustain the tow operators and our service delivery and our ability to continue to provide services to the citizens of San Jose. So this is something that I think we can all agree is essential, that we are able to provide this continuity of services. So we will continue, however, to evaluate the costs and fees and budget as we move towards and through the fiscal year of 2021. As part of our phase 2, the development of the scope for the RFP to bring on board our technology and software platform as well as contract administration, we revisited and finalized the components of that RFP, which we've presented a high-level overview of here. of what will be reflected in the scope. And we've used a two-prong approach, understanding that some of the vendors may provide just the technology and software piece, or they may provide contract administration, or both. And so both of those components will be part of the same RFP. As part of Phase 3, the outreach, negotiation, and contract amendments, we continued to conduct outreach with the existing tow operators, holding 3 meetings since November on both the interim financial relief solution as well as key issues that were directly impacting their ability to provide services, specifically their tow yard capacity. So from that, we identified 2 key issues. One being the communication and coordination between the city the tow operators and the city, especially around high tow volume activities such as street sweeping and special events. And then also our junk slip process, in which PD officers visit the tow yard to evaluate certain vehicles that have been identified by the operators, and they actually issue a form to declare the vehicle as a low value or junk vehicle, being worth less than $500. So from these meetings and discussions with the operators, staff was able to arrive at 3 key process improvements, which we've already begun implementing. So those include updating our street sweep calendar to include the tow zones. I know we're also working on something similar with other high volume activities through Public Works. And then ensuring advanced communication and coordination between city and tow operators. And this will allow them to be able to clear their yards ahead of time before the heavy influx of vehicles into their yards. We've also worked very hard to increase the issuance of the junk slips to make them more frequent. So before it was happening kind of on an as-needed basis or as-available basis. And now we've committed to offering that 2 days a week, which is expected to make a big difference. And we're pleased to report that since we began this work with the operators in January of 2019, we've seen a reduction in tow refusals by 45% between 2018 to 2019. And we see these improvements as being another key factor in continuing on that positive trend. In fact, in December, we only had 2 refusals citywide, so which is great to see. So with that, we have our proposed estimated timeline. This really outlines the work that will come following today, up and through the program implementation of the new model. And so following your direction today, we'll return to council in March with the proposed contract amendments, which would implement the financial relief. And then our goal is to release the RFP for the software platform and contract administration. We would have to first go to the procurement prioritization board, hopefully this month, in order to make that March timeline. From there, in June, we'll come back to council, hopefully with a fabulous vendor to provide these services, so we can do our final award of contract for the software platform and contract administration. And then from there, between July and September, we'll continue negotiations with our operators and come back with any necessary agreements, amendments that are needed, and then be working on implementing that software, the pilot program launch, and then starting the transition of the program over to PD. If all goes well, we're hoping that would be completed in November, and if needed, we would be then at a point where taking all that we learned from the pilot and the software administration, or excuse me, software implementation and contract administration, at a point to determine whether a new RFP is actually needed, or if we can continue with the good work that's been going on with the pilot. So that is a tentative timeline for that piece. Then, of course, if we do have to go through the RFP process, we will be back at council in March to finalize that for the new model. So with that, we are recommending that you accept our final plan for implementation, our recommendation for interim financial relief, and direct us to return to council with the amendment for the tow services agreements to reflect the interim financial relief solution as outlined in the memorandum. That concludes my report.
Thank you. We have a couple members of the public who would like to speak. Jerry? And then Blair.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the council. Just here today to say we support 100% the recommendations from staff. As you all know, I represent all 6 tow contractors. I've been working very hard and very much appreciate the hard work that staff has done. We all know this existing system needs some help, and I think we're getting through it. So hope that you concur and support staff's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Blair?
Hi. I hope the new pilot program and its new internal ideas for tow truck companies in San Jose will include the good new homeless policies from Palo Alto. They have developed good human and civil rights practices with homeless issues that includes a sensitivity for people living in cars and RVs. Thank you.
Thank you. To my colleagues, Councilmember Arenas?
I just have one question. I'm absolutely supportive of this, and I look forward to it. I know that, Jim, you've been working on this, I think, since you were director for DOT, and currently I know that you have a wonderful team that has put together all of the details to make this actually happen, right? So congratulations, you're almost at the tail end of this. I'll be supporting this. I just wonder, how is that transition of the tow program from PBCE to San Jose PD going to happen? I'm guessing there's always going to be a point person on PBCE end, because sometimes, you know, those referrals can come from either side.
So we do, there will be proposals going forward. Do you want to speak to that, Dave?
Yeah, I think what we've seen over the past few years is the number of tows done by code enforcement. Some of the rules have changed, and they actually have a very almost minuscule number of tows that code enforcement does. It's almost entirely done by DOT and the PD, and putting it in with PD just makes sense at this point. Years ago, code enforcement did do a lot more tows than they do now, or request for tows, and that whole program has changed, so that's why it just made sense to move it over here, and I don't think we'll get any complaints.
And I guess I would add to that, I think we want to get all of the new model and the new contracts and all that in place, so the police department is getting handed a program that's in, you know, the new form and the new shape. So that's kind of the timing of working through this. So the team has been working incredibly well together. So thank you for those comments. They've been working very hard, and hopefully we'll have some success in this RFP and the transition process.
Well, there was a vision.
Yeah.
There was a vision, and so now, hopefully this will be seamless. I know that our communities still continue to talk about RVs, and especially those that, for whatever reason, over time, get more dilapidated and stop doing that movement from one end of the street to the other end of the street. Have you seen that reduce, I guess, within code enforcement, or is that more the Department of Transportation is taking care of some of those concerns from our residents?
So if I may on that, basically what happens if the vehicle is occupied, we send out outreach, we try to make contact, we try to offer services, wherever that ends up going. But in the long run, if it remains occupied, that would get turned over to the police to make the contact on the tow. It just ends up being a safer situation. So many of those ended up being, a lot of times with our refusals, part of it was there just wasn't room in the lot. You put an RV in there, that's potentially 3, even 4 parking spots for cars. I actually spoke to Sergeant John Carr this morning before coming here, and that when we started doing it 2 days a week, he was actually out at a tow yard signing junk slips as I was speaking to him, And he said that as of that day, he said every tow yard right now has room because we've been moving so much quicker on getting the cars out of there. So, and the tow yards have also been a huge help in that we get there, they're ready to go, they have the tows lined up, they go down the line, and it's just, these are the vehicles that qualify, and then it really does help streamline the process.
So this is a process that's been worked out
Right.
with code, PD,
Yeah.
and the tow company, so.
Absolutely vetted.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that that's been happening. I know for the tow companies, it was a burden to actually get these kinds of referrals. So I'm glad to hear that they've been clearing cars out, that they've been, you have this newfound process for it. I just want to make sure that we don't lose the housing department and those referrals.
And that will still continue.
And that
There'll
will
be no
still
change in
continue.
that process.
Perfect.
It's just, the hope is now that when it reaches the end of that process,
Yeah.
and ultimately we do have to move the RV,
Sure,
we
sure.
have the ability to move the RV.
Sure, no, absolutely. I've seen in my district, as we all have seen in our respective districts, that at first it becomes that, it is that need of having a place to stay or, a roof over your head, and then all of a sudden it becomes a nuisance for the neighborhood, and for whatever reason, it turns into something else. Or somebody, another new RV comes in and takes the place of that and just kind of ruins it for the other folks who might just want to have a very private place just to sleep until they get back onto their feet. So I'm glad to hear everything is working out, and I wish you all luck for the RFP. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Esparza?
Thank you. This is a topic near and dear in my heart, as they know. So this is a huge issue in District 7, so thank you. First off, thank you. It was great to read about the increased level of coordination and that it's been working, because I had all sorts of questions about, do we need, the last time we had talked about city land and having some city land to use as tow yards, and the fact that we're able to get those vehicles out and have a faster churn rate so that we can have openings is huge. I actually wanted to clarify, this isn't strictly a homelessness issue. In my district, I have a lot of prostitution and drug dealing and other issues out of RVs. It is not just a homeless issue. It's a big safety issue as well when they're deep into small, highly impacted neighborhoods. It leads to accidents. In my industrial area, there were some RVs and that caused some accidents. We may have caused some accidents, we don't know. And so there are a lot of public safety implications to the ability to tow vehicles. And so my question is related to refusals. So only 2 refusals citywide in December?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's great. This is like my happy face.
Yeah.
And so what were those refusals? What are we,
I don't
And-
have the specifics on what type of vehicle. I know what area of the city they were in, but I don't have that with me. I can find out though for you.
and how can we, so moving forward, here we're reducing the fees and we're having an increased level of coordination, including looking at, we're exploring city land for tow yards. How can we get to no refusals, I guess is what I'm getting. How can we incentivize tow operators to not refuse to tow vehicles?
I think that's part of what we're looking at in the new process, what we're looking at with contract amendments going forward, is making the breaches, if there were to be a breach, more costly than they originally were. And then also with the relief, the reason for, basically eliminating the reason for a refusal, unless it would be based on an equipment failure or something like that, which that could always happen. But also looking forward is the ability to have the other tow contractors, if one says, I'm not going to do it. Right now, I can't make the next one in the next district over or the next area over tow the vehicle if one says they can't. What we're looking at is trying to find a way going forward that if one says no, we can actually compel one of the other tow contractors to do it. But we don't exactly know how that's going to look yet, but that's something we're working on as
That
well.
would be great. Well, thank you for all the work that you've done. Yeah, I mean, I'm thrilled to get some movement on this, so.
I just have one question about the budget impact. If this is coming to us in March, why is this not included in the mid-year budget review, since it has a budget impact for 1920?
So I think I know the reason on this one, Rachel, but help me if I don't get it correct.
Okay.
The budget office thought it was important that we connect this item directly with the activity and the work we're doing. It may also be reflected in the mid-year budget. Is Bonnie's still there? So Bonnie Duong, our Deputy Director of Budget, is there as well. Maybe she can shed a little bit more light, but I think we wanted to connect it so you could see kind of specifically why we're doing it. But Bonnie, maybe you can shed more light on it.
Yeah,
Hi.
Bonnie Duong, Deputy Budget Director. We didn't include any recommendations in the mid-year as part of the memo because we weren't quite sure how the revenue was going to end, just because we do have 6 months of data on the revenue. And so year-to-date, we've collected about $160,000, and so we're guessing on the impact.
Okay.
So we do plan on bringing forward recommendations at the year-end process.
Okay, so it'll be part of the cleanup?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And if may add, because of the model, the current model, and it will continue with this proposal for the reimbursements, there's always the potential that that amount could go to zero. But it just depends on what the operators submit for reimbursement and so forth,
Okay,
and number of tows, obviously, so.
makes sense. So the contract amendments will happen, you'll come once to us for contract amendments and the RFP release? That'll be all at the same time in March, or is that two different passes in March?
So, let's see. It perhaps could be at the same council meeting, but, so
Okay.
the proposed contract amendments will just be to, because we're gonna need to revise their contracts
Yeah.
to reflect this new fee and criteria. Additionally, we'll be working on releasing the RFP. We weren't planning to bring that back to council.
No, we weren't.
Oh, okay, so
Yeah,
that's just something
So
that's
the
happening.
council had given the Teeny Committee the authority to
Right.
allow staff to release it based upon our recommendations on the service model.
Okay, thank you.
And the elements of the RFP. So what we're coming to you today to say is, we think we have the right model. One element of it is the new technology to oversee the system, and a third-party administrator. We're seeking direction to be able to issue that in March. Also in March, we'd be coming back to the council to amend the agreements with the tow operators
Okay.
just for this interim financial relief. There will be other steps in front of the full council. In June, we would hope to be back to recommend award of the technology and the third-party administrator. That will, a critical part of that, what will that cost? And how we adjust fees to the registered owner of vehicles, to what the tow companies might pay. So that will all be factored into our award in June. And then based upon that award, we would then go back and work with the tow companies to negotiate kind of the final
The contract
amendments to their
extension.
agreements through the end of March of 2021, which is the end of their agreements.
Okay.
If things are going very well and we like the way the model is coming together and how performance is happening, and we think it's a fair distribution of the costs and fees to all involved, we may extend it beyond that for a year or two, and then ultimately go out with an RFP for tow zones or what's the right model at that point in time. But as long as we keep making progress and we're getting to where we want, we're gonna keep kind of chunking away through this pilot program. Did I?
Yep.
Yep, so that's kind of
Okay.
where
Yeah.
we're headed with it.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Yeah.
So one of the things we're doing today in the motion that I'll be asking for momentarily is we are approving the RFP components.
You are.
Okay,
And yeah, and authorizing us to release that.
And as Rachel mentioned, we do have to go through the city administration procurement prioritization board, given there's so many of them that Jennifer's team is trying to run. It's, where do they all slot? We're trying to make this as high a priority as possible, but there are others as well.
okay. Well, this one is certainly timely.
Yeah.
In terms of contract administration, are you looking for, so it says technology and software-based platform for the dispatch and all of that. But contract administration, are you looking for a third party to also implement potentially other technology for that? Because monthly reporting, monthly billing and invoicing, those are also potential. So these look why do you think they
Overlap.
why do you think they might be separate?
We're just aware of there being vendors who provide both or one or the other.
Okay.
So we didn't want to limit the responses or the bids that we would get for the RFP.
Okay.
So we're proposing them together. So a vendor could bid on both or one or the other.
So are you requiring if they're only bidding on one that they have to talk to the other? Because in terms of the dispatch and the data tracking, doesn't that inform also billing and invoicing?
Absolutely. We will, as we develop the RFP, we're gonna look at all the interrelationships that are gonna be required, and we'll specify that out. So that'll
Okay.
be absolutely required. The way it'll be put together is they can propose on one or the other or both, and we're gonna find the most advantageous one for the city and
Yeah.
approach it that way, based upon kind of quality, value, experience, cost. We'll weigh all those relevant factors and kind of come up with the right balance. It could be all in one, it could be separate. As Rachel mentioned, some companies only do the technology piece. You know, we've talked with them, we've talked with ones that do both. So we want to build enough flexibility to see what may make the most sense. Obviously, if it's all combined, it's probably the easiest for us
Yeah.
to administer. That's probably going to have the highest cost associated with it too, though.
But we're taking into account, if they're separate and we have to be the middleman between these, that has a cost for us in staff, right?
No question about it.
Okay, so I don't want,
Absolutely.
so just because my concern in putting these out separately is that we have RFP number 1 and RFP number 2, and we take the lowest bidder on both of them, but it's just like
We're not.
astronomical for us
We're
to
not putting out separately.
make them communicate.
We're putting out as one RFP.
But you know what I'm saying?
Yes,
If you
I
take
do.
A and B and the components and you get the lowest cost on each of them, it might not be lowest cost for city staff.
Correct. Your points are completely well taken by the team. I think we ultimately want to hand the police department the most effective,
Yeah.
streamlined process as possible.
And
So
I
your-
don't want
your
it to be
points are-
somebody's job to
that-
have to make these two talk to each other.
That's right, that's right. So that is a prime consideration in
Okay.
how we'll evaluate this.
So you're figuring that out in your
Yes.
scoring, right?
That, Jennifer, you might want to.
Correct, yeah. The RFP would be an evaluative process. It wouldn't be awarded on lowest cost. It would be awarded on other criteria that the city staff deems important to consider. Something that we've done for RFPs where there's multiple packages in one, and we sometimes state that the city does prefer a turnkey solution and can, award extra points for providers that can offer
Yeah.
one full package solution. Another option would be if vendors only offer one or another, is to ask them what kind of programs they can interface with. So then
Right.
staff can evaluate how flexible that particular solution is. So these are definitely components that staff is evaluating and developing the RFP.
Okay, good, thank you. That's just a big concern. I
Totally.
don't want it to end up being
Every member of that team.
harder for us, harder
is-
for PD. We need
is
all the
very-
PD who we have
Yeah.
doing jobs that
That's
are
right.
way more impactful to public safety.
And that's why we're doing this kind of carefully and thoughtfully. If we, we are pushing hard to meet the March deadline.
Yeah,
If we don't, it would probably be because of the time it takes to put it together in the thoughtful,
Okay.
best manner. So we're being
Thank
pretty
you.
deliberate to try and get to a better place.
okay,
Yep.
thank you. I think ton of progress. I think it's awesome. I don't want to badger too much on this, but we also really want to get this right.
Yep.
Yeah, so,
Absolutely.
okay, thank you. I'm looking for a motion.
Move to approve.
All in favor? Right, that motion enthusiastically carries. We will move on to open forum. Blair.
Hi. Excuse me. Hi. To quickly offer, I hope the streamlining ideas that you're talking about for the tow things at this time, I hope you can still have room and heart in your mind, and in your room in your heart to be able to look into good human rights practices from Palo Alto and know how to incorporate that into what you're working on. To talk about a bit more about Vision Zero stuff, my stuff with accountability with technology and Vision Zero, they came to local government at the same time in 2014. And so, I have a pretty deep commitment to want things to go well for both programs, basically. I think there's a really important symbiotic relationship that they can have that's just, it's astounding, I think, what technology accountability can offer our future. And so I hope that you can really respect that and want to work towards good, open public policy practices in the future of San Jose, and how Vision Zero technology can offer that and can offer open policy practices, and we develop as a city together, just beauty and love and community harmony. And I mean, all the tools are there for good community harmony ideas. So I hope you take advantage of that and quit trying to keep Vision Zero stuff so secretive. I mean, and technology stuff so secretive. I hope in conclusion that with 18 seconds left, that you will be working. I will be talking more about statistics issues that were talked about here in another time, and I'm hopeful of what you talked about today, and thank you.
Thank you. Meeting is adjourned.